Baltimore, Maryland, home to an ambitious young nurse hoping to make her mark on the world, Lara Crockett. She works the night shift at one of the city's busiest hospitals.
Don't worry, I'll keep checking on you. It's gonna be fine, you'll see.
And takes great pride in her work.
Laura was a very giving person, a very caring person. She loved that aspect of taking care of patients.
Lara, I believe, really, truly loved nursing. I saw it in the way she took care of her, her patients.
Lara's happy to work the long hours of the night shift, especially when there's good company, like fellow nurse Ricardo Muscolino.
Oh, code red. Code red. Patient has an elevated heartbeat. Vital signs that they're irregular.
How about doing some actual work before you cause a real emergency?
He did have a good sense of humor. He made everybody laugh. Ricardo was a funny guy. Ricardo was attractive to Lara because she was obviously a beautiful woman. Beautiful eyes, beautiful smile, and excellent personality on top of that.
Laura was one of those people, when you meet her, you just fall in love with her. And he did.
On shift all week?
Problem is,
Yep.
Good.
she's spoken for.
Lara was married, and she talked about how unhappy she was with her husband.
You want to go for coffee sometime?
Maybe.
She married when she was very young to an older man, and the older man had a son.
Good morning.
But she found out soon after they married that he, in fact, did not want to have any more children. And children, she really wanted children. That was the most important thing in her life.
Lara can't help but have second thoughts about her marriage.
He was a wonderful person. Everybody loved him. But they just kind of grew apart.
Those aren't the only reasons she's unhappy.
Bye.
Lara was the one who is more the breadwinner rather than the husband. So a lot of expenses are falling on her.
All right. That better?
And Ricardo is nothing like Lara's husband.
The doctor will be here in a few moments, all right?
Ricardo was very motivated by money, definitely.
No more skateboarding, right?
He had worked very hard for everything he got.
I've seen him work 3 months, no break, and some of those hours are 12 to 16 hours.
So, how about that morning coffee?
I can't. I just picked up another shift.
Ah, okay. Just don't sleep in and miss our flight to Vegas.
Not a chance.
Ricardo, Lara, and I and her sister went to Vegas to do a nursing conference. And it was all about critical care, taking care of the patient. And she organized the trip.
So what do you think of Ricardo?
My sister was trying to set me up with him. And when I saw him, I said,
No. No? Well, not for me. I think he's kind of hot.
One of the nights, Ricardo and Lara hooked up. They spent the night together. We returned to Baltimore. They continued that relationship. Lara was married still at that time. She wasn't divorced or separated.
she had met her first husband when she was young, very young. And then she met Ricardo, who kind of was in, the same field and doing the same thing and wanted kids. And they just had more in common at the time. So he charmed his way into her life and she just fell for it.
Ricardo and Lara couldn't be happier.
He thought she was beautiful and smart, and she thought he was charismatic and outgoing and ready to own the world.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll be there soon.
Who's that?
Hospital. Short-staffed.
Again?
Gotta go.
While he romances Lara,
Bye.
Ricardo also spots an opportunity at work.
There's been a nursing shortage for a very long time.
Ricardo was a very smart man, even though he had no business background that I know of. And he thought, well, why don't I start my own agency?
Ricardo's agency takes off.
He started just the perfect time. It was all the perfect timing. And he probably had over 150 to 300 nurses working for him, give and take. He was very successful.
It seems that the timing is also perfect for Lara. Within a year of meeting Ricardo, she leaves her husband.
Lara's attraction to Ricardo was that he was fun. He was adventurous. They used to travel all over the world together. He was spontaneous. I mean, pick up and go to New York City for the day. I mean, he was fun. And I think she liked the bad boy in him. He was a bit of a bad boy.
Lara was very, very attractive woman, and I think she could get, anybody, she wanted. But, they say love is blind.
Psychotherapist Stacy Kaiser and forensic psychologist Brian Russell have their own thoughts on Lara and Ricardo's relationship.
While a lot of people would think that Ricardo is someone that Lara wouldn't typically be drawn to, I think he has a couple of really strong things going for him. She senses his ambition, he's very good to her, he's courting her in a way that a lot of women like to be courted. He's taking her on trips, he's making her feel special. So it's no surprise to me that she is slowly getting herself lured into a relationship with him.
Lara's relationship with Ricardo begins with Lara's cheating on her first husband. And any time a marriage or relationship begins with infidelity, there is a lot of pressure, particularly on the person who previously cheated, for this new relationship or new marriage to work out, because they've given up a lot. And that's a dangerous way to go into something, to think that, well, because of what I sacrificed, this has to work, this has to be right.
And that can create problems for their future relationship.
With his business booming, Ricardo decides it's time to take another plunge.
What a beautiful house.
Our house.
The house in Fallston is beautiful. The whole house was like a small mansion.
Do you think it's, haunted?
Ooh, I don't know. Let's check it out.
And Lara enjoys their lavish lifestyle.
Lara loved nice things. Lara loved jewelry. Lara loved nice clothing, makeup. Lara loved to spend money. And one of the things that was attractive to her was that he kept their finances intact. He was very, very responsible. She used to say to me, he's the type of person that always pays everything early.
Between buying a new home and affording the finer things in life, Ricardo and Lara seem to have it made.
Hey, listen, I'm gonna have to let you go. Something urgent just came up. Wow.
I think that those two together just attracted each other. They seemed to get along great, and they had a great life. They really just had a great life.
Just as the relationship is heating up, Lara decides to make her own ambitions come true.
Her master's in anesthesiology was really important.
You're still looking at this.
It's fascinating.
She wanted to be a nurse anesthetist for a very long time, and she finally got an opportunity to do it, and she went full-heartedly.
You're serious about this?
Yeah. I like the idea of putting people to sleep.
Yeah, as long as you don't try to put me to sleep.
Well, as long as you don't make me mad.
Well, if you are serious about this.
Oh, you're amazing. Thank you.
You happy?
I'm happy. Oh, you're incredible. Thank you.
He paid for her to go back to school and get her master's.
I knew you were worth it.
But it's not exactly what he had in mind.
Any room in there for me?
She'll be moving to Washington, D.C., while he stays in Baltimore.
Always.
She saw it as a great opportunity. She just saw it as a better type of job in nursing.
Don't go.
It's only an hour away. Bye.
While Lara studies, Ricardo focuses on work.
Ricardo would travel to Florida a lot for the businesses he had down there.
But Ricardo's travels and Lara's ambitions come at a cost.
The physical distance was going to put pressure on their relationship. And at that time, it was probably more important for her to pursue anesthesia, to become, a nurse anesthetist. They broke up at that time.
And she's lonely in D.C.
Hey, Jonathan. I was looking for you before. I wanted to let you know. I got my biology test back. And
Lara at that time started seeing, different people. But Ricardo, he was extremely upset about that.
I really, really appreciate it. I might have a few more questions. Ricardo, what are you doing here?
Is this why you wanted to come to school?
Don't start.
I haven't even begun to get started.
It's okay, just give us a minute.
All that money I lent you for school, I want it back.
You know that I don't have it.
Then I'll see you in court.
What?
Ricardo is the kind of person that if you cross him with money, you'll definitely end up in the court.
Ricardo, you can't be serious.
Yeah, just watch me.
He's sued many people, but to do it to the person you're in a relationship with is just bizarre.
But will Ricardo's bizarre behavior tear them apart for good?
She made a comment that, Ricardo, you don't even care about me.
And it devastated them.
Ricardo Muscolino and his girlfriend Lara Crockett are on the outs after almost a year together. When he discovers she's seeing other people, he takes her to court to get back the money he loaned her.
She was living at her father's house, and the period of time went by that they didn't talk to each other.
Ricardo, what do you want?
At some point, they started talking to each other again, because I remember saying, why would you go back to someone that would sue you?
Lara, don't be like that. I miss you.
Well, you have a funny way of showing it. Why did you come to my school and embarrass me in front of my friends?
Oh, come on, I was upset.
Up until now, you don't care about how I'm doing. You don't pay attention to how I feel.
That's not true. Okay, I think about you all the time. I can prove it.
Oh, come on, Ricardo.
Check the intersection near your dad's place.
What?
Yeah. Every time I drive by, I think about you. And I throw a penny out the window.
So he told her, go to the intersection now, and you'll know that I'm thinking about you. And when she went to the intersection, it was filled with pennies. It just won her over. It just melted her inside, because he's not a loving person. He's not someone who, oh, I love you, honey, this or that. She realized he loved her.
Lara gives Ricardo another chance, and he drops the lawsuit. Within the year, the off-again, on-again couple makes their relationship permanent.
They got married in Hawaii. They got Maui'd.
He paid for everything for everybody.
His family was there, and I was there, and it was actually beautiful. It was so much fun to be in Hawaii and share the time that we had together.
Lara decides that she's going to disregard the lawsuit, push aside her anger, and get back together with Ricardo. I think that's partly because she's still very young. And so she isn't really clear about how people should behave, how one should be treated, what respect really looks like.
And most of us, if we were her friends, would look at that and tell her, he's nutty. You ought to stay away from him from now on. She might see that as, wow, but he's just so hurt by the fact that I'm not with him. I have to go back. I'll never find anybody that loves me this much.
One of the things we know about Ricardo is that money does have strings attached for him. And so while it seems very kind-hearted that he is paying for everyone to go to Maui for this wedding, it does make me wonder if by any chance there are some strings that we don't know about yet that are attached.
Now happily married, their thoughts turn to children.
Unfortunately, what happened was she had at least one miscarriage.
When she had lost the first baby with Ricardo. It was a boy, and it devastated them to lose that baby. They were both really upset over it.
They think they know why.
Lara was working in anesthesia department, so they both thought that maybe the gas that escaping, they thought that that was, causing the miscarriages.
Lara decides to quit nursing, and it seems to work.
Laura was born to be a mother, so when she finally was pregnant with her first child, she was just so happy.
So Victoria was born, and she wasn't here very long before Laura was pregnant again.
Within 3 years, the couple has 2 more girls, Shannon and Kayla.
Hang on, Victoria, I'm coming, baby. Hang on, I'm coming.
She was so happy to be having children.
I'm coming.
She loved her children. That was her world.
For nearly 10 years, the family is happy.
Careful.
Ricardo loved being a father. I think he had his good days and his bad like any parent. But he loved his kids.
Checkmate.
Ricardo is very good at chess, and his oldest daughter loves chess.
Why, you think I'm going to let you win just because I'm your father? You didn't pay attention.
She can't beat her dad.
Oh, come on.
I mean, Ricardo, chess is his game.
All right. Who's next?
Me! I want to play.
I think Ricardo saw the world as a chess game.
But their world falls apart when Ricardo's business goes south.
Hospitals were cutting back. Everybody was cutting back. So he wasn't making as much money. So all of a sudden he finds himself with a lot of debt at a time when the economy's slowing.
They say we don't even qualify.
When the housing market fell, a lot of people were losing their houses, and the government kind of stepped in there and started helping people refinance and lower their mortgage and so forth.
The Muscolinos can't get mortgage relief because Ricardo makes too much money.
The government's not helping him, so he just stopped paying everything. Stopped paying mortgages, stopped paying taxes, stopped paying everything. At first, Laura just was, well, this is the game he's playing.
Hello? He's not in. This is his wife, Mrs. Muscolino. Can I help you?
At first, it didn't bother her so much until all of a sudden, creditors start calling, we're going to take your house.
I understand. Let me speak to my husband. Goodbye.
Nothing's being paid. And she's like, what? Nothing's being paid.
And soon Lara and Ricardo face even more challenges. Can their marriage handle the pressure?
She was very upset a lot of the times because she was nervous all the time what was going to happen.
Ricardo!
They have a lot of problems and they're not discussing it, and she's feeling very lonely.
Ricardo Muscolino's business is hit hard by the 2009 financial crisis, causing tension at home as he and his wife Lara raise their 3 daughters.
Ricardo's financial maneuverings definitely were becoming a strain on the family. Lara didn't know what their assets or their liabilities were. She had no idea. All she knew is that creditors were constantly calling. In fact, sometimes they'd even come to the house looking for him.
Ricardo? They're back.
She wasn't the type of person that wanted to be sued and wanted to be dealing with creditors calling.
She was very upset a lot of the times because she was nervous all the time what was going to happen.
Just when Lara thinks it can't get any worse, it does.
The IRS was coming after him and any property that he had to get their tax money back.
There was a chance that they were going to foreclose on their house in Fallston, and that's when she became very alarmed.
Ricardo!
That was their home. That was where their children lived. That's the schools that the children went to.
So what's your plan now?
Ricardo comes up with a crazy idea.
I know. We'll split up.
You want to break up?
No, not for real. Think about it. All right, we put the mortgage in your name, and we'll be able to afford it. Don't worry.
I don't know.
Shh. I got this. I got this.
They separated so that she would not have to suffer from his financial issues. And he actually moved to Florida for a good bit of time so that they could show that they were actually separated.
And that's what stopped them from being foreclosed. So they were separated, but in reality, they were still very much married.
She hated the situations that Ricardo would put them into.
Hey, I'm just checking in on when you're coming home.
That was their only way that they could think to solve it at the time.
Then, to top it off,
Hi.
Hey.
Ricardo stops helping with the family finances, claiming he's broke.
Is that all you got, Mom?
Yeah, that's it for this week. Things are a little tight. Put this in the fridge, sweetie.
As soon as my sister had the mortgage put in her name, he stopped pretty much contributing to anything. He considered the house was hers, so she would have to pay for it.
Mom, the internet's not working.
Oh, okay. I'll take care of that later.
She took care of everything for the kids. She took care of all the household expenses. Everything was on her.
When's Dad coming home?
I don't know, sweetie. Soon, I hope. Okay, can you close out? We're gonna have supper soon. Shannon, can you come give me a hand?
Yeah.
Just get the plates.
Laura lived on credit cards a lot. She wanted to be able to keep the lifestyle they were accustomed to, and it became more and more difficult.
Especially since Ricardo is rarely home.
Ricardo came and went a lot. He would go to Florida for a few days and he'd come back. She would say, I don't even always know where he is.
Even though Lara and Ricardo's separation is supposed to be fictitious, it's starting to feel like the real thing.
Laura's marriage is really starting to fall apart. They have a lot of problems and they're not discussing it, and she's feeling very lonely.
Laura's options are very limited at this point. I mean, she is a nurse anesthetist, and that's a good job, but it's probably not a job at which she's going to be able to earn the kind of money that would enable her to maintain the lifestyle that she and Ricardo had had for a while.
Laura's been put in a very difficult position, and this has got to be creating a great deal of resentment for her. I would imagine that she would begin wondering whether or not this is a relationship even worth having, because in a lot of ways, he's much more of a burden than he is a benefit.
And it sort of really shows you how a narcissistic individual can be very functional when everything's going right, and then become profoundly dysfunctional on a dime when things start going wrong.
People face financial crises on a daily basis, and even financial ruin, and they don't behave as badly as Ricardo. Assuming Ricardo doesn't get caught and go to jail, I think the chances of their relationship lasting are slim and none.
With Ricardo away so often, Lara develops her own interests.
She had a passion for the afterworld, which is how she got involved in the ghost hunting. I used to ask her, why are you so into the afterlife? And she said, if anything ever happened to one of my children, I want to know that I could reach out to them.
Her ghost hunting partner is Bailey Maxwell.
I think this is a good spot for the camera. It's infrared, so it can film in the dark.
He looked like a young Ricardo, a bad boy.
There's definitely something here. Feel it?
You scared?
No. Not when you're around.
They would set up cameras and record things. They ended up becoming friends and talking about this ghost hunting stuff, and it was just something that they had that in common.
He was a young kid, 22. He already had a child. He had no real job.
You hear that?
No. What is it?
It's my elevated heartbeat.
With Ricardo away, it seems that Lara and Bailey are becoming more than just friends.
He may have loved the idea that she was an older woman that has money. He told her something like, I can't get you off my mind. At the time, it filled the need in her life to feel loved.
You're so beautiful.
She saw in him somebody who was willing to do anything for her. And what a great mom she is. Everything that any woman wants to hear. And I think he truly believed it.
A few weeks into the affair, it's getting harder and harder to keep it secret, especially from her daughters.
Can I have my phone, please?
Her eldest daughter noticed that she was on her phone a lot, which she never did before.
Mom,
What? I'm just texting your aunt.
Laura had a very loose boundaries with her daughters. They had access to her social media, access to her cell phone. She had no privacy.
But what happens if the secret gets out?
What's up?
She's whispering the entire time because they think she's just so terrified.
That does not happen often. People just don't go into the police precinct and say, "You want me."
After Ricardo Muscolino's business fails, his wife Lara turns to a new hobby and secret life to ease her loneliness. Except her hidden passion doesn't stay secret for very long. One night, Lara's daughter Victoria logs into her mother's social media account.
For some reason, she just decided to start reading. And that's how she found out. She read the messages between my sister and this young man. Victoria was crushed seeing these messages. Her mom and dad, whether or not they had separate lives or not, was still her mom and dad. And nobody wants to see that mom is doing something that maybe she shouldn't be doing.
The fact that Lara and Ricardo's daughter discovered Lara's affair had to have been very traumatic for her, because kids and teenagers hold their parents up to a standard. And so to find out that her mother, who she thought was, hardworking and still connected to her father, is cheating on him, had to have been quite impactful.
I think Lara and Ricardo's daughter's discovery of Lara's affair is a great illustration of the indirect abusiveness of adultery when there are children involved, because it is going to eventually blow up the family. It's going to impact the kids in a negative way. And here you can just put yourself in this kid's place. Just imagine yourself finding out that your mother's cheating on your father, and how disillusioning that would be about whatever rose-colored glasses you had on about your parents and their love for each other.
1 week after the explosive discovery, Victoria hears alarming sounds coming from her parents' bedroom. Then, all hell breaks loose.
She says in the 911 call that she heard shots, or she thinks she heard what sounded like gunshots.
please hurry.
She's whispering the entire time because they think she's just so terrified.
It's a busy night for Baltimore area police. In addition to Victoria's 911 call, the local sheriff's office gets an unexpected visitor.
Police officers described him as disheveled. They thought maybe he looked slightly homeless.
Meanwhile, police arrive at the Muscolino home.
They started calling for any residents to come out again so they can come out safely and you don't have any incidents. The daughters came from their bedrooms. They were called downstairs, taken out of the house immediately.
But not everyone comes out of their rooms.
At that point, they noticed that the master bedroom door was still closed.
And they went in, again, not knowing what exactly was going on inside that bedroom.
They're greeted by a terrible sight.
They found a middle-aged woman lying on the bed with multiple gunshot wounds.
We're gonna need an ambulance. You have a shooting victim.
The victim was identified as Laura Muscolino.
Incredibly, Lara is still conscious.
She had movement in her eyes and a little bit in the head. She was gasping for air and in very significant pain.
Luckily, one of our patrol deputies was also a medic, so he was able to place tourniquets on her.
Ma'am, stay with us. Just keep breathing.
They were asking her questions, who did this, who shot you? However, she's not able to speak because of her wounds.
It looks like the shooter was only feet away when Lara was shot.
It was up close. It was personal. Some of the bullets that had gone through her arm, one of them was probably through her arm and up into her neck area. A second shot was in her mid-side to her back, and then 2 more shots into the arm.
And nearly as shocking,
He put his hands in the air and said, "I'm a wanted man."
He does not explain why he's wanted, why he's surrendering himself. It seemed he thought we were already looking for him.
That does not happen often. People just don't go into the police precinct and say, "You want me."
After the man turned himself in, he was placed in custody.
the mysterious visitor refuses to say anything else.
He had only said that he would speak with his attorney at that point in time and declined to speak to any police officers.
Barely clinging to life, Lara is transported to a Baltimore trauma hospital. After 8 hours struggling to survive, she dies of her injuries.
When I got the news about my sister, I was at work. I got pulled out of a meeting to say that there were some police officers at front for me. He said, "I need to let you know something." He said, "Your sister's dead." I said, "What do you mean? She can't be dead." And he said, "Was she sick?" I said, "No, she wasn't sick. She's fine."
With their rocky marriage, all fingers point to Ricardo. But is there more to this murder than meets the eye?
She knew he was gonna make her life hell.
No one actually saw someone pull a trigger or commit a crime.
In a shocking turn of events, mother of 3, Lara Muscolino, is murdered by an unknown shooter. Investigators are hunting for her killer. At the police station, they take a closer look at the homeless-looking man they have in custody.
And then, sure enough, they put one and one together by last names and figured he was related to that incident.
He is none other than Ricardo Muscolino.
He was, at that point, considered the suspect. He was taken back to the Criminal Investigation Division for an interview.
Detectives discover that the day of the murder, Victoria told her father that Lara was having an affair.
I don't know why she told her dad. You know, she has a relationship with her dad, and I think she felt like mom wasn't doing right and that someone needs to tell dad.
You know how long it's been going on?
Ricardo was very calm, quiet, relaxed. He said he wasn't upset. He would file for a divorce. He was going to talk to a lawyer in the morning.
Thanks for telling me.
Victoria was thinking she was going to do good by her dad.
And Victoria's 911 call seems to confirm police suspicions.
I think it was my dad.
At that point, we had an idea what the motive was. We have witnesses, we have our motive, and we have our suspect in pocket. Now we're just trying to, piece the rest of the puzzle together.
Piece by piece, the puzzle becomes clear.
On the left side of the bed, there was a clothes hamper with a pillow on top of it. Once I removed the pillow from the clothes hamper, there it was. It was an empty black 9mm handgun. After the suspect shot Lara, I believed he just chucked the gun in there.
Ricardo is charged with first-degree murder. If they can find his fingerprints or DNA on the gun, the case is watertight. But results from the lab show that the murder weapon provides no useful evidence.
We were not able to develop any prints on the gun. And as far as DNA testing goes, since that gun was found in his own hamper with his dirty clothes and Laura's dirty clothes, his DNA is going to be on the weapon anyways.
Amazingly, Ricardo is released on bail while he awaits trial.
I was furious when he got bail. Didn't think he was going to get it, and the judge decided that he wasn't a flight risk.
It is very unusual for somebody to be released on bail that is accused of committing murder.
Immediately, Ricardo hires the best defense attorneys in Baltimore. He thinks he can beat the charge.
Defense's argument was, we don't know what happened in that room because no one actually saw someone pull a trigger or commit a crime.
Then, surprising new evidence comes to light.
There was an interior surveillance camera within the residence.
The tiny camera was missed when police first searched the house.
You wouldn't have noticed it just by going by. It was a small camera, and it was up on top of a shelf.
It had been installed by Lara herself months earlier.
The video was there so that my sister could see if there was any ghosts in the house.
When police review the footage, they discover it was filming the night Victoria told her father about Lara's affair. The night of Lara's murder. The video shows Ricardo arriving home with Victoria. It all seems perfectly normal.
The oldest daughter goes up the stairs. You see Ricardo let the family dog out. You see him get a glass of water. You see him go up the stairs. He gets to the top of the stairs and you can see him go directly into the master bedroom.
Although the camera couldn't see inside the closed room, this new evidence is powerful.
Wake up!
Ricardo, what's happening?
You thought you could make a fool of me? Is that what you thought? After all I did for you! How dare you cheat on me?
It's not often that you capture a murder, on film. It's like the holy grail from, an investigation standpoint to find that and to have that for trial purposes.
But no one knows why Ricardo turned himself in.
Ricardo never testified in the trial, and he never elected to speak to the police officers once he turned himself in. So really, we have no idea what his version would be.
I don't think Ricardo snapped. Almost all behavior like this is the result of a progressive escalation over time, and I think that it is almost inconceivable that Ricardo did not at least think he might do this when he confronted Lara about the news of the affair.
His ego was so tied to both his money and his wife. And so having lost both of those things and her going and rejecting him and being with another man could have been just enough to set him off to the point where he would think, I want her dead, and he would go and kill her.
As always, I'm most empathic toward the children. Nobody could have foreseen that he was going to go and do that. And so I don't think she should be racked with guilt over that.
On November 2nd, 2017, Ricardo is convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. His motive is as old as time.
I think that was his last way of controlling her. I think the more he sat there looking through those messages, the more he thought, if we get a divorce, I'll lose everything. The house is in her name. That's hers. The kids may want to go live with her. I'm not going to have anything. And how dare she do this to me?
Lara and Ricardo's 3 daughters now live with a foster family, though they're still in touch with their father.
I think they have mixed emotions about their dad. They still love their dad. It's their dad. But their dad has put them in a bad situation. Now they don't have a mom or a dad.
And nothing will bring Lara back.
We were supposed to be able to have our kids grow up together. We were supposed to be able to have the girls have their weddings and do all that stuff together and grow old together. It's not fair that she was taken from her kids and that she was taken from her parents.
I miss Lara all the time. She was a sister to me. We really were. I miss her at every holiday. I miss planning vacations together. I miss just talking to her. She's my best friend. And she's gone forever.
Imagine a skyline glittering with a million neon promises, a sprawling metropolis where secrets are buried beneath layers of concrete and unimaginable wealth. It is the freezing winter of 2004, and the biting winds sweeping through the towering skyscrapers of Tokyo carry a whisper that will soon shatter the pristine facade of high society. High above the bustling streets, locked within the impenetrable walls of a luxury Roppongi Hills penthouse, a scene of unimaginable horror awaits discovery. This is not a crime of passion born in the gritty underbelly of the city, but a calculated, clinical strike at the very heart of the Japanese elite. A mysterious disappearance of a prominent socialite suddenly morphs into a gruesome tableau, leaving the city reeling and investigators staring into an abyss of unanswered questions. The chilling detail that haunts the first responders is not the violence, but the profound, suffocating silence of a fortress seemingly breached from the inside, marking the bloody birth of a cold case that would torment the nation for decades. The victim was a dazzling fixture in the exclusive orbits of Tokyo's billionaires and untouchable politicians. She was a brilliant art appraiser who moved seamlessly through the hidden corridors of power, authenticating priceless masterpieces for the ultra-rich. When her absence was finally noted, it was not with frantic worry, but with a hushed, nervous tension that rippled through exclusive private clubs and subterranean boardroom meetings. The discovery inside her penthouse was a masterclass in psychological terror. The heavy mahogany door was deadbolt from the inside, the state-of-the-art security systems remained fully active, and yet, the immaculate living room had been transformed into a cryptic nightmare. A strange clue sat perfectly centered on a shattered glass coffee table, untouched by the chaos around it, defying every logical explanation the seasoned detectives could formulate. The newspapers the following morning screamed with sensational headlines, branding it the ultimate locked-room enigma of the modern era. The community shock was palpable, a collective gasp echoing from the bustling pedestrian crossings of Shibuya to the quiet, manicured imperial gardens of Chiyoda. How could someone vanish, leaving behind a scene of such meticulous devastation in a building guarded by elite private security and round-the-clock surveillance? The investigators combed through the penthouse, their ultraviolet lights revealing traces of a struggle that had been painstakingly scrubbed clean, leaving behind a sterile scent of industrial bleach that masked the metallic tang of tragedy. The strange clue on the table, a perfectly folded origami crane crafted from a shredded, heavily redacted financial ledger, mocked their desperate efforts, pointing toward a sinister motive buried deep within the shadows of corporate espionage and aristocratic greed. As the investigation plunged deeper into the victim's glamorous life, the detectives found themselves navigating a treacherous labyrinth of immense privilege and lethal deception. The witnesses, composed of wealthy heirs, powerful chief executives, and silent socialites, offered absolutely nothing but polite smiles and airtight alibis. The elite ranks closed with the terrifying efficiency of a steel trap, creating an impenetrable wall of silence that frustrated even the most aggressive interrogation tactics. Every promising lead withered and died in the suffocating atmosphere of high-stakes corruption. Security footage from the night of the incident showed a localized blackout, a seemingly random digital glitch that plunged the specific floor into absolute darkness for exactly 3 minutes. In that tiny window of time, a phantom slipped through the cracks of a billion-dollar security grid, executed a flawless crime, and dissolved back into the neon-soaked night without leaving a single identifiable fingerprint. The pressure from the highest echelons of government threatened to crush the investigative team, demanding swift answers while simultaneously placing invisible roadblocks at every crucial intersection of the case. They discovered a hidden wall safe behind a priceless contemporary painting, its heavy steel door blown open with military-grade precision, yet completely emptied of its sensitive contents. The missing items were never reported by her affluent clients, a glaring omission that hinted at secrets far too dangerous to be spoken aloud in a court of law. A solitary footprint, barely visible on the plush imported carpet, was traced back to a bespoke Italian shoemaker who exclusively served a clientele of global oligarchs, a lead that vanished into thin air when the artisan's records were mysteriously destroyed in a sudden warehouse fire. The chilling reality set in that they were not hunting a common criminal, but an invisible syndicate operating entirely above the law, capable of erasing a human life and manipulating the truth with terrifying ease. Days bled into weeks, and weeks agonizingly stretched into months, transforming the sensational live news broadcasts into sporadic updates and, finally, into the quiet, dusty archives of a seemingly unsolvable puzzle. The vibrant city moved on, the flashing billboards replaced by newer, brighter distractions, but the dark shadow of the Roppongi penthouse lingered like a stubborn curse. The lead detective, a decorated veteran who had previously cracked the city's most notorious underworld syndicates, found himself completely consumed by the phantom of the art appraiser. His cramped office became a frantic shrine to the victim, walls plastered with gruesome crime scene photos, red string connecting the unapproachable elite in a desperate web of hypothetical conspiracies. The deadlock was absolute, an agonizing stasis that slowly eroded his sanity and eventually forced him into a disgraced, haunted retirement, leaving the investigation completely cold and dead. Years cascaded into decades, turning the shocking event of 2004 into a grim urban legend whispered by a new generation of Tokyoites. The next decade arrived with sweeping technological advancements, yet the digital revolution offered absolutely no new tools to unlock a crime that had been executed with analog perfection. The penthouse itself remained notoriously empty for years, a multi-million-dollar monument to the unresolved, its windows remaining dark amidst the glowing skyline, repelling potential buyers who sensed the lingering trauma trapped within its walls. The elite society continued their opulent charity galas and secretive underground auctions, their pristine reputations seemingly untarnished by the unsolved horror that had once threatened to expose their darkest foundations. It was the perfect crime, an arrogant display of supreme power that proved, to those who dared to look closely, that true justice was a luxury commodity simply out of reach for anyone outside the golden circle. The haunting memories remained vividly etched only in the minds of the victims' distant relatives and the broken detectives who had sacrificed their careers on the altar of a rigged game. Every anniversary of the discovery prompted a minor flurry of retrospective articles, a brief resurgence of morbid public interest that quickly died down against the overwhelming, deafening silence of the authorities. The chilling mystery became a macabre cautionary tale of flying too close to the sun, a grim reminder that moving among the untouchables carries a fatal, absolute risk. The origami crane, still perfectly preserved in a secure, climate-controlled evidence locker, stood as a silent testament to a monstrous secret, its cryptic paper folds holding the damning answers that an entire justice system had utterly failed to unfold. The cold case seemed destined to rot forever in the abyss of forgotten history, and its eternal triumph of boundless wealth and privilege over truth and retribution. Then, the impossible happened, a sudden and seismic shift that violently ripped the decaying bandages off a 20-year-old wound. The catalyst was not a brilliant forensic breakthrough or a newly discovered eyewitness coming forward, but the fragile, gasping breath of a dying man. Fast forward to a sterile, heavily guarded hospital suite in the present day, where an aging billionaire, a ruthless titan of industry whose name was entirely synonymous with Japanese economic supremacy, lay tethered to life support. As the monitors beeped a rhythmic, terrifying countdown to his inevitable demise, the crushing weight of mortality finally shattered the ironclad resolve that had protected him for a lifetime. Surrounded by the harsh scent of antiseptic and the oppressive silence of impending death, he desperately demanded the immediate presence of the highest authorities, initiating a deathbed confession that would violently resurrect the ghosts of the past and expose a secret so vile it threatened to capsize the highest echelons of society. His voice, though frail and trembling violently, carried the devastating power of a wrecking ball, systematically dismantling the elaborate fortress of lies that had concealed the perfect murder for nearly 2 decades. He spoke of a massive, secret syndicate operating deep within the elite, an underground cabal that traded in stolen cultural heritage, systematic blackmail, and ungodly sums of untraceable money. The victim, the brilliant art appraiser, had not been a willing participant in their shadow economy, but a captive asset who had finally discovered the true, horrifying extent of their global operations. She had meticulously gathered irrefutable evidence, compiling the redacted financial ledgers that detailed the purchase of influential politicians, federal judges, and high-ranking police officials. Her brave threat to expose the entire corrupt network sealed her fate, triggering a highly coordinated assassination masked as a locked-room enigma executed by international professional cleaners imported specifically to ensure absolutely no trace was left behind to incriminate the architects of the conspiracy. The dying billionaire detailed the exact, sickening mechanics of the cover-up, revealing how the brief power outage was engineered from a remote offshore server, and how the bespoke footprint was an intentional misdirection planted solely to send the police chasing ghosts across continents. The agonizing truth flowed from his cracked lips, painting a terrifying picture of a society completely compromised, where the supposed guardians of justice were nothing more than highly paid actors reading from a script written by the ultra-rich. He tearfully confessed to personally ordering the hit, his corrupted soul buckling under the unbearable weight of a guilt he had masked with arrogant pride for 20 years. The chilling confession revealed that the origami crane was intentionally left by the assassin as a mocking signature, a folded piece of the very ledger she had threatened them with, a twisted, sadistic joke hidden in plain sight that proved the absolute invincibility of their corrupt empire. As the long, continuous flatline tone finally echoed through the opulent hospital suite, the shockwaves of his final words began to detonate across the entire nation. The revelation was catastrophic, a sudden unearthing of a cold case that immediately transformed into the most explosive, devastating scandal of the century. Countless arrest warrants were furiously issued for names that had previously been considered totally untouchable, dragging powerful chief executives, former police commissioners, and esteemed national politicians out of their fortified mansions and directly into the harsh, unforgiving glare of relentless media scrutiny. The community shock that had paralyzed Tokyo in the winter of 2004 was violently reborn as a furious, roaring demand for public accountability, shattering the illusion of a polite, lawful society and exposing the festering rot hidden beneath the polished veneer of the elite. The sudden burst of frantic arrests and midnight raids painted a chaotic picture of a justice system desperately trying to reclaim its lost integrity. Yet, even as the criminal masterminds were finally brought in chains, stripped of their bespoke suits and forced to face the blinding, relentless flashes of the press cameras, a profound sense of melancholy blanketed the ultimate resolution. The explosive truth had entirely exposed the monstrous secrets of the elite, but it could not reverse the agonizing decades of injustice or bring back the brilliant, vibrant life that had been so ruthlessly extinguished in that dark penthouse. The emotional climax of this dark saga was not found in the triumphant, loud slamming of prison cell doors, but in the devastating, quiet realization of how easily the entire system had been manipulated by those sitting comfortably at the top. The lingering impact of the unsolved case, now tragically and shockingly resolved, forever changed the cultural landscape, instilling a deep, incurable paranoia within the populace, representing a permanent loss of innocence that no amount of late-arriving justice could ever truly heal. The restless ghost of the Roppongi penthouse finally found a semblance of rest, the dark windows of the luxury apartment seemingly a little less menacing in the wake of the earth-shattering revelation. The long-retired lead detective, now a fragile old man heavily weathered by years of obsessive grief and professional disgrace, stood outside the towering building one last time, shedding a single, silent tear as the breaking news alerts endlessly flooded his phone screen. The haunting memories of the bloody crime scene, the mocking paper origami crane, and the impenetrable wall of elite silence would forever remain etched deeply into the collective psyche of the sprawling city. The monstrous secret of the elite had finally been dragged screaming into the unforgiving light, ending the agonizing deadlock of the Tokyo cold case, but leaving behind a chilling, permanent reminder that in the gleaming metropolis of neon and shadows, the most terrifying monsters are always the ones wearing the most expensive suits. The dawn that broke over Tokyo the morning after the billionaire's final, ragged breath was not one of golden illumination, but of a harsh, unforgiving glare that stripped the city of its comforting illusions. The metropolis, usually a symphony of highly orchestrated order and polite routine, awoke to a chaotic cacophony of wailing police sirens and panicked news anchors scrambling to articulate the sheer magnitude of the unfolding disaster. The deathbed confession had triggered a chain reaction of catastrophic proportions, sending shockwaves violently rippling through the meticulously manicured gardens of the political elite and the sterile, high-altitude boardrooms of the corporate overlords. The community shock morphed instantaneously from a collective gasp of disbelief into a roaring, uncontrollable inferno of public outrage as the names of the implicated, men and women who had adorned the covers of financial magazines and dictated national policy, were broadcast mercilessly across every digital billboard spanning the Shibuya crossing. It was a spectacular, terrifying unraveling of a meticulously woven societal fabric, exposing a grotesque underbelly of systemic corruption that had been silently feeding on the city's lifeblood for more than 2 decades. The impenetrable fortress of the Tokyo aristocracy was finally crumbling, its walls breached not by a master detective, but by the overwhelming, suffocating guilt of a dying patriarch who could no longer carry the monstrous weight of his own creation. Yet, the explosive revelation was merely the turbulent beginning of a far more dangerous, infinitely darker chapter in this sprawling saga of blood and power. The monumental task of prosecuting the untouchables fell upon the shoulders of a fiercely driven, incorruptible special prosecutor, a woman whose relentless pursuit of justice had already earned her a terrifying array of powerful enemies. Stepping into the suffocating atmosphere of the Central Police Headquarters, she inherited a mountain of circumstantial evidence, a constellation of panicked witnesses, and the chilling, ever-present reality that the very ground beneath her feet was heavily mined by agents of the syndicate. She understood immediately that the deceased billionaire, despite his immense wealth and formidable influence, was merely a single, rotting branch on a massive, deeply rooted tree of global criminality. The real battle was not against the dead, but against the living, breathing network of billionaires, corrupted judges, and compromised politicians who were now fighting with the feral, desperate savagery of cornered predators. The stakes had never been higher. This was no longer simply about securing a long-overdue conviction for a murdered art appraiser, but about desperately salvaging the shattered soul of an entire justice system that had been violently exposed as a hollow, manipulated sham. The investigation frantically shifted from an archaeological dig into a cold case to a high-speed, high-stakes hunt for the remaining architects of the conspiracy and, crucially, the phantom assassin who had executed the flawless locked-room murder 20 years prior. The infamous origami crane, that mocking, delicate piece of folded paper evidence, was carefully extracted from its climate-controlled tomb and subjected to a dizzying array of modern, cutting-edge forensic technologies that had not existed in 2004. Microscopic chemical analysis revealed faint, almost imperceptible traces of a rare, synthetic polymer used exclusively in the manufacturing of advanced, military-grade stealth equipment, a terrifying clue that elevated the profile of the killer from a mere hitman to a highly sophisticated, state-sponsored ghost. The chilling details sent a wave of icy dread through the prosecution team, confirming their worst fears. The people they were hunting commanded resources that rivaled those of sovereign nations, operating with a terrifying impunity that transcended borders and mocked the very concept of international law. The mysterious disappearance of the assassin after the crime was not a stroke of luck, but a meticulously planned extraction, leaving the investigators to chase a shadow that had been ruthlessly designed to evaporate upon contact with the light. As the special prosecutor relentlessly tightened the noose around the necks of the arrested elite, the Shadow Syndicate retaliated with a swift, merciless brutality that paralyzed the city with a renewed sense of profound terror. Key witnesses, individuals who had bravely stepped forward from the insulated ranks of high society to corroborate the dying billionaire's claims, began to experience a series of terrifying, fatal accidents that defied all statistical probability. A prominent financial auditor, poised to testify about the untraceable offshore accounts used to fund the murder, perished in a sudden, catastrophic car crash when his vehicle's computerized braking system inexplicably failed on a winding mountain road. A retired police commissioner, who had been heavily coerced into burying the initial investigation, was found dead in his heavily secured study, the victim of an apparent, yet deeply suspicious, cardiac arrest just hours before he was scheduled to sign a comprehensive plea agreement. The message broadcasted by these seemingly random tragedies was brutally clear and universally understood. The syndicate was still intensely active, immensely powerful, and utterly willing to scorch the earth to protect its remaining secrets and its highly guarded leadership. The ensuing trial of the century became a surreal, heavily fortified spectacle that transfixed the globe, transforming the solemn Tokyo courthouse into a besieged fortress ringed by legions of heavily armed riot police and swarms of frantic international journalists. Inside the cavernous courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense, heavy with the unspoken realization that the actual defendants were not merely the men sitting behind the reinforced glass, but the fundamental integrity of Japanese society itself. The defense attorneys, an army of the most expensive, ruthless legal minds money could buy, launched a terrifying, highly coordinated assault on the prosecution's case, attempting to systematically dismantle the billionaire's deathbed confession as the drug-induced, hallucinatory ravings of a dying, deeply regretful old man. They aggressively attacked the chain of custody of the origami crane, mocked the advanced forensic findings as experimental pseudoscience, and relentlessly cast doubt on the credibility of every surviving witness who dared to speak against their wealthy, influential clients. It was a masterclass in legal warfare, a chilling demonstration of how absolute wealth could dynamically distort reality, manipulate public perception, and aggressively twist the blindfold of justice until the truth became indistinguishable from a carefully constructed lie. Day after agonizing day, the special prosecutor stood her ground against the relentless onslaught, methodically laying out a horrifying, irrefutable tapestry of systemic corruption, meticulously connecting the heavily redacted financial ledgers to the secret bank accounts of the defendants. She painted a vivid, sickening picture of the murdered art appraiser, not as a tragic victim of circumstance, but as a courageous, solitary whistleblower who had been ruthlessly hunted and slaughtered by a cabal of monsters hiding in plain sight. The emotional climax of the trial arrived when the prosecutor presented a newly decoded digital communication, intercepted by international intelligence agencies just days prior, an encrypted message sent from a secure server located deep within the Swiss Alps. The message contained a single, chilling directive, authorizing the liquidation of the remaining compromised assets in Tokyo, unequivocally proving that the syndicate was actively orchestrating the cover-up from the safety of international waters. The courtroom descended into absolute, stunned silence as the undeniable reality set in. The men on trial were expendable pawns, sacrificial lambs offered up to placate the raging public, while the true architects of the nightmare remained completely untouched, watching the proceedings with cold, detached amusement. When the final verdicts were eventually read, echoing through the heavy, oppressive silence of the courtroom, they brought a complex, deeply unsatisfying wave of closure that felt more like a hollow defeat than a triumphant victory. The arrested chief executives and corrupt politicians were handed maximum, life-ending sentences, their arrogant smirks finally collapsing into expressions of genuine, pathetic terror as they were heavily escorted away to maximum security isolation. The sensational news broadcasts immediately declared it a monumental triumph of the legal system, a definitive, glorious end to the 20-year mystery that had haunted the glittering metropolis, but those deeply involved in the desperate struggle knew the agonizing truth. The head of the snake had indeed been severed, violently and publicly, but the massive, invisible body of the global syndicate remained entirely intact, rapidly regenerating its losses and silently slithering deeper into the protective shadows of the international financial system. The community shock slowly subsided into a lingering, incurable paranoia, a permanent, chilling realization that the system designed to protect them was terrifyingly fragile, endlessly susceptible to the corrupting influence of unimaginable wealth and unbridled power. The special prosecutor, heavily burdened by the staggering emotional toll of the trial, retreated to the quiet solitude of her dimly lit office, staring intensely at the sprawling, chaotic evidence board that still dominated the room. She knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that the phantom assassin, the ghost who had breached the Roppongi penthouse and left the mocking origami crane, was still breathing, still operating, and perhaps even walking the bustling streets of Tokyo at that very moment. The chilling mystery of the killer's true identity remained the final, agonizingly unsolved piece of the puzzle, a dark void that mocked her relentless pursuit of absolute justice. She reached out and carefully touched the photograph of the brilliant art appraiser, silently promising the victim that the war was far from over, that the fragile, hard-won victory in the courtroom was merely the opening salvo in a lifelong crusade against the untouchables. The haunting memories of the case would forever remain deeply embedded in her psyche, a constant, painful reminder of the incredible cost of uncovering the truth in a world engineered to bury it. Outside her window, the sprawling skyline of Tokyo glittered with its million neon promises, a breathtakingly beautiful facade that now looked profoundly sinister, completely devoid of the innocent charm it once possessed. The luxury skyscrapers, piercing the night sky like arrogant monuments to infinite greed, cast long, deep shadows where the most terrifying secrets still lay patiently hidden, waiting for the next inevitable cycle of corruption and violence to begin. The dark legend of the 2004 locked room murder had finally concluded its violent, destructive arc in the public eye, transitioning from a desperate cold case into a dark, terrifying chapter of modern history. Yet, the lingering impact of the terrifying saga continued to vibrate beneath the concrete surface of the city, a low, ominous hum that warned every citizen of the invisible predators circling just out of sight. The case was officially closed, the files sealed and the conviction secured, but the true horror of the story lay in the chilling, unspoken understanding that the terrifying monsters who had orchestrated the nightmare had simply retreated into the darkness, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The final act of this grand, tragic theater of shadows did not conclude within the sterile, echoing halls of the High Court, but in the suffocatingly narrow alleyways of old Tokyo, where the ghosts of the past still linger in the steam of ramen stalls and the flicker of dying lanterns. While the world celebrated the public downfall of the billionaires, a far more dangerous hunt was beginning in the absolute silence of the underworld, led by the disgraced, retired detective who had first stepped into the blood-soaked Roppongi penthouse 20 years ago. Driven by an obsession that had long since transcended the boundaries of professional duty, he moved through the city like a wraith, his eyes fixed on a target that the official task forces had long deemed a myth. He knew that the trial, for all its sensational headlines and dramatic convictions, had merely trimmed the rotting hedges of a much larger, more ancient garden of secrets. The phantom assassin, the architect of the locked room enigma, was not a ghost or a digital glitch, but a living, breathing entity whose existence was the ultimate insurance policy for the global elite. This shadow, he realized, was the only true key to dismantling the syndicate's invisible foundation, and the pursuit would lead him into a heart of darkness, where the laws of men held no sway and the price of the truth was paid in blood. As the detective delved into the forgotten archives of the city's most secretive black market brokers, he discovered a chilling pattern of disappearances and accidental deaths that stretched back decades, all sharing a single, terrifying signature that had been overlooked by the bureaucratic machinery of the police force. Each victim was a person of immense talent or dangerous knowledge who had dared to cross the invisible lines drawn by the syndicate, and each crime scene had been meticulously sanitized with the same industrial-grade precision he had witnessed in 2004. The community shock of the recent trial had created a rare moment of structural weakness, a hairline fracture in the syndicate's impenetrable wall of silence that allowed a single, desperate informant to whisper a name that had never appeared in any official dossier. This name, whispered in the back of a rain-slicked mahjong parlor, belonged to a legendary cleaner known only as the Origami Master, a ghost-like figure rumored to be a former operative of a disbanded intelligence unit, a man who had perfected the art of the impossible murder. The detective felt a cold, familiar shiver race down his spine as he realized that the mockery of the folded crane was not just a signature, but a psychological weapon designed to paralyze anyone who dared to follow the trail. The hunt intensified, moving away from the neon-lit districts of Roppongi and Ginza and into the decaying industrial outskirts of the city, where the shadows were deeper and the silence more profound. Every step the detective took felt like he was walking into a meticulously laid trap, a feeling of being watched by a predator that had never known defeat. He tracked the synthetic polymer traces, the rare chemicals, and the whispers of high-end logistics until he found himself standing before an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the Tokyo Bay, a structure that didn't exist on any modern map. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient dust, and the walls were lined with the chilling remnants of a lifetime spent perfecting the art of death. There were blueprints of the city's most secure buildings, dossiers on every major political figure, and a workshop filled with the delicate tools of an origami artist, including the very same redacted financial ledgers that had cost the art appraiser her life. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The assassin had not fled the country, but had been living in the very heart of the city he had terrorized, hiding in plain sight while the world searched the corners of the globe for a phantom. The final confrontation between the broken lawman and the Master of Shadows was not a cinematic explosion of violence, but a quiet, terrifying dialogue in the twilight of the warehouse, a meeting of two men who had been defined by the same cold case for 2 decades. The Origami Master emerged from the darkness not as a monster, but as a weary, silver-haired man whose eyes held the cold, detached clarity of someone who had seen behind the curtain of reality. He spoke with a soft, melodic voice that carried the weight of 1,000 secrets, confessing not out of guilt, but out of a profound, nihilistic boredom. He revealed that he was the ultimate byproduct of the elite's greed, a weapon forged by the very people the detective had spent his life trying to protect. The art appraiser's death had been his masterpiece, a crime so perfect it had broken the spirit of the police department and allowed the syndicate to operate unchecked for 20 years. He spoke of the strange clue as a test of the city's resolve, a test that the authorities had failed spectacularly, proving that the pursuit of truth was always secondary to the preservation of power. As the detective listened to the chillingly rational justification for the murder, he realized that the syndicate's power did not come from their wealth or their connections, but from their ability to make the public believe that justice was a choice rather than a right. The Origami Master offered the detective a final, devastating choice. He could take the evidence gathered in the warehouse and destroy the remaining members of the global cabal, or he could walk away and live out his remaining years in peace, knowing that the cycle of corruption would eventually consume everyone he loved. The emotional climax of the story reached a fever pitch as the detective looked into the abyss of the assassin's eyes and saw the reflection of his own shattered life. The weight of 20 years of failure, of the victim's haunting memory, and of the community's lingering shock coalesced into a single, decisive moment of clarity. He understood that the only way to truly solve the Tokyo cold case was to sacrifice the very system he had once sworn to uphold, to become the shadow that hunts the shadows, ensuring that the elite would never again feel the comfort of their impenetrable fortresses. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant, rhythmic lapping of the bay against the rusted pier. When the sun rose over Tokyo the following morning, the warehouse was a charred, unrecognizable ruin, its secrets supposedly lost to a sudden, inexplicable fire that the authorities were quick to label an electrical accident. However, in the weeks that followed, a series of anonymous, highly encrypted documents began to appear on the desks of the world's most fearless investigative journalists, detailing the names, bank accounts, and darkest sins of the global syndicate's remaining leadership. One by one, the untouchables began to vanish, not into prison cells, but into the same terrifying void they had created for their victims. The community shock was replaced by a quiet, pervasive sense of awe as the city realized that a new, invisible force was at work, a guardian of the truth who operated far outside the reach of corrupted laws. The Tokyo 2004 cold case was finally, irrevocably solved, but the cost had been the total transformation of the man who had sought the answer, a tragic victory that left a permanent scar on the soul of the metropolis. The haunting memories of the art appraiser and the Roppongi penthouse remained, but they were now accompanied by a new urban legend, a whisper of a man who walks the neon-soaked streets with a folded paper crane in his pocket, a silent reminder that no secret is buried deep enough to escape the light. The sensational news broadcasts eventually moved on to newer tragedies, but the lingering impact of the revelation remained, a tectonic shift in the way the people of Tokyo viewed their leaders and their lives. The elite society, once so arrogant and invincible, now lived in a state of perpetual, shivering dread, knowing that the fortress had been breached and the dead of the past was being collected with clinical, terrifying precision. The story of the cold case had become a dark parable for a modern age, a story of how the truth, when suppressed for too long, becomes a monster that eventually devours its creators. The neon lights of the city continued to flicker, casting long, dramatic shadows over a populace that had learned the hard way that the most dangerous secrets are the ones we tell ourselves to keep the darkness at bay. In the end, the resolution of the Tokyo cold case was not a return to order, but a descent into a new kind of chaos, one where the boundaries between the hunter and the hunted had been permanently erased. The victim's family finally received the closure they had been denied for 20 years, but it was a bitter, cold comfort, a reminder of all the years lost to a lie. The retired detective, now a ghost himself, disappeared into the heart of the city, his mission complete, but his soul forever altered by the proximity to such absolute darkness. The script of the crime had been rewritten, the sensational headlines had faded into history, and the city of Tokyo moved forward, forever changed by the confession on a deathbed and the shadow that refused to die. The case was closed, the secret was out, and the elite had been exposed, but the echoes of the 20-year-old murder would continue to haunt the skyscrapers and the alleyways, a chilling testament to the enduring power of a mystery that refused to be forgotten. The final, lingering image was not of a courtroom or a prison, but of a single, perfectly folded origami crane sitting on a rainy park bench, a silent promise that in the world of the ultra-rich and the untouchable, the truth is the most lethal weapon of all. The story of the Tokyo 2004 cold case ends here, but its legacy is written in the nervous glances of the powerful and the quiet resilience of those who seek the truth at any cost. It is a story of community shock, of mysterious disappearances, and of the strange clues that lead us into the heart of the human condition. It is a reminder that even in the most cinematic and dramatic of tragedies, the real horror lies in the silence of those who know the truth and choose to say nothing. As the screen fades to black and the voiceover falls silent, the weight of the unsolved remains, a haunting melody that plays in the background of every glittering neon night, reminding us that some secrets are too big to stay buried forever. The elite may have their fortresses, their money, and their power, but they can never truly escape the shadows they create, for the shadows always know the way back home. The great fallout began not with a bang or a sudden explosion, but with a digital whisper that echoed through every smartphone and television screen in the sprawling metropolis, a relentless torrent of data that effectively dismantled the world as Tokyo knew it. National reckoning, institutional collapse, and the final shattering of the Gilded Gods became the daily headlines as the leaks from the Swiss servers began to peel back the skin of a society that had been rotting in silence for decades. The community shock that had once been a localized tremor around the Roppongi Hills penthouse had now escalated into a full-scale social earthquake, a cataclysmic shift where the once untouchable figures of the financial and political world found themselves stripped of their immunity and exposed to the freezing winds of public fury. This was the era of the Great Purge, a time when the neon lights of Shibuya seemed to burn with a harsher, more judgmental intensity, illuminating the faces of those who had profited from the silence of the 2004 cold case. The investigation was no longer confined to a single room or a single murder. It had become a hunt for the soul of a nation, a desperate attempt to excise the tumor of systemic corruption that had been allowed to grow in the dark. The retired detective, now a man whose name was whispered in hushed tones as either a saint or a saboteur, watched from the shadows as the city he had once sworn to protect began to eat its own. The deadlock that had paralyzed the police force for 20 years was violently broken, replaced by a chaotic, high-speed dismantling of legacies and dynasties. The strange clue of the origami crane had evolved from a mocking signature into a symbol of the ultimate resistance, a paper bird that had finally taken flight and carried the weight of 1,000 secrets to the light. Every morning brought a new sensational headline: corporate titans found in disgrace, high-ranking ministers resigning in the dead of night, and the sudden, mysterious liquidation of multi-billion-dollar accounts that had funded the syndicate's shadow war. The pace was frantic, a vivid and terrifying blur of justice and vengeance that left the public breathless and the elite in a state of terminal panic. Yet, amidst the roar of the crumbling empire, the detective remained focused on the one shadow that had yet to be cast into the light, the master of the origami, the phantom who had started it all in that cold winter of 2004. The investigation into the origami master had moved beyond the charred remains of the warehouse by the bay, transitioning into a global manhunt that bypassed traditional borders and Interpol protocols. The special prosecutor, now working in a secret, reinforced bunker beneath the heart of Tokyo, found herself coordinating a digital dragnet that spanned continents, tracking the ghost through a labyrinth of shell companies and encrypted nodes. The chilling detail that kept her awake at night was not the extent of the corruption, but the realization that the assassin had been a ghost by choice, a man who could have been anyone, a businessman on the subway, a gardener in the imperial palace, or the silent driver of a black sedan passing through the Ginza district. The mystery disappearance of the assassin after the warehouse fire was a haunting reminder that while the syndicate's leaders were being dragged into the light, the weapon they had used was still out there, sharpened and waiting in the dark. The community shock turned into a deep-seated paranoia as citizens began to wonder how many more origami masters were hiding in the pristine facade of their high-tech utopia. The lingering impact of the unsolved case reached its emotional climax not in the arrests, but in the quiet, devastating stories of the people whose lives had been collateral damage in the syndicate's rise to power. The art appraiser was no longer just a victim. She became the face of a lost generation of truth seekers, a martyr whose death had finally triggered the collapse of a rigged system. The public began to demand more than just convictions. They demanded a total reimagining of their society, a world where the locked room mystery of 2004 could never happen again. This period of national mourning was marked by the haunting memories of the victims whose cases had been buried alongside the Roppongi murder, a collective surfacing of grief that demanded a reckoning with the past. The skyscrapers of the city, once seen as symbols of progress and prosperity, were now viewed with a chilling suspicion, their dark windows reflecting the faces of a populace that had finally seen the monsters behind the glass. The detective's journey led him back to the very beginning, to the quiet, unassuming neighborhood where the art appraiser had grown up before she was seduced by the glittering, lethal world of the ultra-rich. It was here, in the silence of a small suburban shrine, that he found the final, most devastating piece of the puzzle, a secret buried not in a digital ledger or a Swiss bank account, but in the heart of a grieving family. He discovered that the victim had not been a random target of the syndicate, but the daughter of a man who had once tried to expose the same corruption decades earlier, a man whose own accidental death had been the precursor to the 2004 tragedy. The cycle of violence was older than anyone had imagined, a hereditary curse of greed and silence that had spanned generations, turning the Tokyo cold case into a legacy of blood that had finally come full circle. The shock of this revelation was a visceral, physical weight that nearly broke the detective's resolve, forcing him to confront the reality that he had been fighting a war that started long before he ever pinned on a badge. As the city of Tokyo moved into a state of permanent transformation, the headlines began to shift from the crimes of the past to the uncertainty of the future. New Tokyo Rising, the Glass Age, and the end of the Untouchables dominated the news cycles, but the detective knew that the victory was incomplete as long as the origami master remained at large. The final encounter did not happen in a crowded courtroom or a burning warehouse, but in the most mundane of places, a quiet, rain-slicked platform at a minor train station on the outskirts of the city. The phantom assassin did not fight. He simply waited, a man whose presence was as thin and sharp as a blade, his eyes reflecting the cold neon of the departing train. There were no cameras, no police sirens, and no sensational broadcasts to capture the moment when the two shadows finally converged. It was a silent, clinical exchange of words that carried more power than any deathbed confession, a final acknowledgement between two men who had spent their lives on opposite sides of a mirror. The origami master revealed the ultimate truth of the syndicate, that they were not a group of men, but a system of belief, a conviction that the strong have the right to silence the weak to maintain the illusion of order. He explained that he had never been a loyal soldier, but a witness to the inevitable collapse of a world built on lies. His mockery of the origami crane was a reminder that even the most complex systems can be folded and torn by a single hand, a philosophy of destruction that had finally consumed its creators. The assassin did not ask for mercy or forgiveness. He simply handed the detective a small, weathered notebook, its pages filled with the locations of the remaining shadow cells across the globe, and then he stepped into the path of the oncoming dark, vanishing into the rain as if he had never existed. The detective stood alone on the platform, the notebook heavy in his hand, realizing that the phantom had given him the ultimate burden, the responsibility of being the eternal guardian against the return of the shadows. The aftermath of this final encounter was a quiet, systemic dismantling of the global network, a slow-motion collapse that took years to complete but was never televised or celebrated. The Tokyo 2004 cold case was officially removed from the books. The files moved from the active evidence lockers to the historical archives, yet the haunting memories of that winter night remained a permanent part of the city's DNA. The Roppongi penthouse was eventually demolished. The space where it stood turned into a public park that served as a memorial to all those who had been silenced by the elite. The community shock had faded into a watchful, sober vigilance, a society that learned the hard way that the price of peace is the constant, uncomfortable search for the truth. The detective, now a ghost in his own right, disappeared from public view, his name becoming an urban legend whispered by young recruits in the police academy, a cautionary tale of the man who burned his own life to light up the dark. The final legacy of the case was not found in the laws that were passed or the monuments that were built, but in the subtle change in the atmosphere of the city. The neon lights still glittered, the skyscrapers still reached for the clouds, and the trains still ran with clinical precision, but there was a new transparency in the air, a sense that the secrets of the elite were no longer buried under layers of concrete and wealth. The haunting mystery had been solved, the villains had been exposed, and the truth had been told, but the emotional climax of the story was the realization that the battle between the light and the dark is a never-ending cycle. Every time a new, mysterious disappearance, or a strange clue, appeared in the news, the people of Tokyo would look toward the shadows and remember the woman in the penthouse and the man with the paper crane, a collective memory that served as a shield against the return of the Untouchables. The story of the Tokyo 2004 cold case concludes not with a sense of finality, but with a lingering, powerful question about the nature of justice in a world of infinite shadows. It is a story that started with a shocking opening and ended with an emotional reckoning that touched the heart of every citizen. The sensational crime news had become the foundation for a new social contract, a vivid and tense reminder that the truth is a living thing that must be nurtured and protected. As the cinematic voiceover fades and the screen goes dark, the viewer is left with the haunting image of a single origami crane resting on a rainy street corner, its paper wings ready to take flight at the first sign of a new secret being buried in the dark. The city of Tokyo continues to breathe, its million neon promises now tempered by the knowledge of the million secrets it once held, a metropolis that has finally learned to live in the light, however fragile and hard one that light may be. The cold case is solved, the secrets are out, and the phantom is gone, but the echo of the 2004 mystery will remain forever, a haunting melody in the symphony of the great, glittering city. The passage of time in a city as relentless as Tokyo is not measured in years, but in the layers of neon and steel that gradually bury the sins of the past, yet the echoes of the 2004 cold case refuse to be silenced by the encroaching future. 2 decades after the blood-soaked discovery in the Roppongi Hills penthouse, the metropolis had entered what historians and social critics now called the Glass Age, a period of forced transparency where the once impenetrable fortresses of the elite were theoretically open to the piercing gaze of a radicalized public. The sensational revelations triggered by the billionaire's deathbed confession and the subsequent global purge had fundamentally rewired the collective psyche of the nation, turning every corporate logo and political slogan into a target for intense, feverish scrutiny. The community shock had matured into a cold, calculating vigilance, a society that no longer looked up at its towering skyscrapers with awe, but with a lingering, visceral suspicion that the shadows within were merely waiting for the light to dim once again. The investigation that had started with a single victim had effectively put an entire civilization on trial, and as the final chapters of this dark saga unfolded, the city found itself hovering between a fragile new dawn and the terminal pull of its own dark history. The special prosecutor, once the fiery protagonist of the trial of the century, had transitioned into a legendary, almost mythical figure of institutional reform, yet she carried the invisible scars of her war against the syndicate like a heavy, leaden shroud. Her office, situated high above the bustling corridors of power, was no longer a place of frantic activity, but a quiet sanctuary for the few remaining secrets that were deemed too dangerous for public consumption, even in the age of transparency. She spent her nights staring at the digital ghosts of the 2004 files, realizing that while the architects of the conspiracy had been dismantled, the architecture of the greed itself remained embedded in the very foundation of the global economy. The sensational news headlines had moved on to the next crisis, but she remained haunted by the missing pieces of the puzzle, specifically the true origin of the origami master and the silent, clinical efficiency with which he had manipulated the fate of a nation. The mysterious disappearance of the assassin was a void that she could never fill, a mocking silence that suggested that for all her legal victories, the most lethal component of the syndicate was still breathing, still watching, and perhaps still folding the paper cranes of destiny in the dark corners of the world. Far below the glittering offices of the elite, in the gritty, smoke-filled labyrinths of the old city, the retired detective lived out his final days as a ghost among the living, a man who had traded his sanity for a glimpse behind the curtain of reality. His small, cluttered apartment was a museum of the obsession that had defined his existence, the walls covered in faded newspaper clippings with headlines like "Cold Case Shadows" and "The Roppongi Enigma Solved." He was no longer the hunter, but a silent observer of the world he had helped to shatter, watching as the new generation of detectives navigated a landscape he no longer recognized. He often found himself drawn back to the site of the original crime, where the luxury penthouse had been replaced by a somber public memorial, a garden of stone and water designed to represent the purity of the truth. Yet, as he sat on the benches among the office workers and tourists, he felt a profound, chilling disconnect, knowing that the truth being celebrated was merely the version of history that the system had finally allowed to be told. The real story, the one contained in the weathered notebook given to him by the origami master, was a far more terrifying narrative of a world that was still compromised at its highest levels. The emotional climax of the detective's journey arrived on a freezing winter evening that mirrored the atmospheric conditions of the night the art appraiser was murdered 20 years prior. He received a final, anonymous package delivered to his doorstep, a small wooden box containing nothing but a single, perfectly crafted origami crane made from a piece of paper that was unmistakably a fragment of a new, top-secret government document. The strange clue was a devastating confirmation that the cycle of corruption had already begun to regenerate within the new administration, proving that the Glass Age was nothing more than a new, more sophisticated layer of deception. The shock of this realization was absolute, a crushing blow that stripped the detective of his final remnants of hope and forced him to confront the terrifying reality that justice was not a destination, but a temporary state of grace in a world governed by the physics of power. He realized that the origami master had not surrendered or retired, but had simply moved on to the next set of clients, serving the new elite with the same clinical, lethal precision that had defined his career in the shadows of the old regime. The lingering impact of the 2004 case continued to vibrate through the cultural fabric of Tokyo, manifesting in a series of strange, unexplained events that the media struggled to frame within the context of the new transparency. Ghost signals on secure corporate networks, mysterious disappearances of low-level bureaucrats who asked too many questions, and the sudden, inexplicable failure of high-tech security systems all pointed toward the continued existence of a shadow syndicate, one that had adapted to the light by becoming even more transparent than the system itself. The community shock was replaced by a resigned, cynical acceptance that the monsters had simply changed their suits and their slogans, and that the battle for the soul of the city was a war without an end. The art appraiser, once a symbol of courageous defiance, was now a tragic figure in a historical tragedy, a woman who had died to expose a truth that the world was ultimately unwilling to fully embrace. Her memory remained a haunting presence in the city, a flickering neon light in the darkness that served as a warning to anyone who dared to dream of a world without secrets. As the voiceover narrative reached its final, haunting crescendo, the focus shifted from the individuals to the city itself, a sprawling, glittering entity that had survived the scandal of the century, only to find itself back where it started. The cinematic visuals of the Tokyo skyline at night, with its million points of light and its deep, impenetrable shadows, served as the backdrop for a final, philosophical meditation on the nature of crime and punishment in a modern metropolis. The sensationalism of the news, the drama of the trial, and the tension of the manhunt were all revealed to be parts of a larger, more complex play, a performance designed to provide the public with a sense of closure, while the real power remained safely hidden behind the glass. The Tokyo 2004 cold case was not a story of a mystery being solved, but a story of a mystery being integrated into the mythology of a city that thrives on the tension between what is seen and what is hidden. The final lesson of the Roppongi penthouse was that the truth is not a light that dispels the darkness, but a torch that illuminates the sheer scale of the abyss. The detective's final act was a gesture of quiet, desperate defiance, a decision to release the contents of the origami master's notebook not to the authorities or the journalists, but to the wind itself. He spent his final hours transcribing the secrets onto thousands of small paper slips, folding each one into a miniature crane and releasing them from the rooftop of a building overlooking the heart of the city. As the thousands of paper birds drifted through the neon-lit air, a blizzard of secrets falling upon the unsuspecting populace below, he felt a brief, fleeting sense of peace, a realization that the truth was finally out of his hands and in the possession of the people. It was a chaotic, beautiful, and ultimately futile gesture, a final explosion of reality in a world of carefully constructed narratives, and as the last crane left his hand, the detective faded into the darkness of the city, his mission complete and his soul finally at rest. The city of Tokyo continued to breathe, oblivious to the paper rain falling from the sky, a metropolis that had seen everything and forgotten nothing, a place where the ghosts of the past are always just a heartbeat away. The haunting memories of the 2004 cold case will forever be a part of the city's identity, a dark thread woven into the vibrant tapestry of its future. The story of the art appraiser, the billionaire, the prosecutor, and the assassin is a reminder that in the world of the elite, secrets are the most valuable currency, and the price of exposure is always absolute. The sensational crime news will continue to report on the next mystery, the next scandal, and the next shock, but the echo of the Roppongi penthouse will remain the definitive anthem of the Glass Age. As the cinematic voiceover finally falls silent and the screen fades to a deep, resonant black, the viewer is left with the image of a single, glowing window in a skyscraper that should be empty, a silent confirmation that the shadows are still there, waiting for the next cycle to begin. The Tokyo cold case is over. The files are closed, and the world has moved on, but the mystery of the origami crane remains, a delicate, paper-thin promise that the truth is always there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough or broken enough to unfold it. The morning after the paper rain was unlike any other in the history of the modern world, as the sunrise over Tokyo illuminated a city that had been physically and spiritually blanketed by the secrets it had tried so desperately to bury. The thousands of white origami cranes, each containing a fragment of the ultimate truth, had drifted into the vents of subway stations, onto the balconies of luxury high-rises, and into the hands of ordinary citizens who were now reading the damning evidence of a 20-year conspiracy. The community shock had reached a point of absolute saturation, a fever pitch of realization that transcended the news cycle and became a visceral, lived experience for every soul in the metropolis. The sensational headlines that had dominated the airwaves for months were now replaced by a quiet, terrifying clarity as the people themselves became the curators of the investigation, piece by piece reconstructing the shattered mirror of the elite's deception. This was the Great Demasking, a moment where the digital transparency of the Glass Age was bypassed by a primitive, tactile movement that no firewall could block and no government official could redact. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the rustle of paper, a sound that would forever be associated with the final collapse of the old order and the birth of a terrifyingly honest future. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for those who had survived the first wave of arrests, as the secrets contained within the cranes were not merely financial records, but the intimate, grisly details of how the syndicate had maintained its grip on the throat of the nation. Names that had been considered secondary players in the 2004 cold case were suddenly thrust into the spotlight, revealed to be the true architects of the shadow economy that had turned the art appraiser into a martyr. The special prosecutor, standing in the center of her bunker-like office, watched as her monitors surged with incoming data from citizens who were scanning and uploading the paper slips, creating a decentralized, unstoppable database of corruption. She realized then that the retired detective's final act had been a masterstroke of psychological warfare, a move that rendered her own legal maneuvers obsolete by handing the power of prosecution back to the public. The sense of mystery and haunting dread that had once surrounded the Roppongi penthouse had now expanded to encompass the entire city, as every alleyway and boardroom was revealed to be a crime scene waiting for its day in court. In the midst of this societal upheaval, the retired detective had seemingly vanished into the very shadows he had spent his life exploring, leaving behind a legacy that was as complex as the origami he had dispersed. Those who had seen him on that final night described a man who looked not like a hero, but like a shadow that had finally found its place in the world, a figure of quiet, tragic resolution. The news channels, desperate for a narrative to anchor the chaos, began to broadcast special reports on his life, painting a picture of a man who had sacrificed his career, his family, and his sanity to solve the unsolvable. They spoke of his early days as a brilliant young investigator, his public disgrace following the 2004 failure, and his long, lonely vigil in the dark corners of the city. Yet, the detective was no longer interested in the accolades of the world he had broken. He had become a part of the city's folklore, a spectral guardian whose presence was felt in every sudden draft of wind and every unexpected discovery of a paper bird. He had achieved the ultimate detective's dream. He had not just solved the case, he had made it impossible for the case to ever be forgotten. The investigation into the origami master took a chilling turn as the special prosecutors team finally managed to trace the origin of the paper used in the final reign of secrets. It was not just government stationery, but a unique, high-security stock that had been discontinued decades ago, a type of paper that had only been used by the victim's father during his time as a high-ranking cultural attaché. This shocking question began to ripple through the investigative circles. Was the origami master actually a protector of the bloodline, a man whose original mission had been to safeguard the art appraiser before he was corrupted or compromised by the syndicate? The connection between the victim's father and the assassin added a new, sensational layer of mystery to the 2004 crime, suggesting that the locked room murder was not just a corporate hit, but a tragic betrayal within a hidden war that had been raging for generations. The community shock intensified as the public realized that the monsters they were hunting were not outsiders, but the very people who had been entrusted with the nation's heritage, turning the pursuit of justice into a deep, painful excavation of the Japanese soul. As the weeks turned into months, the city of Tokyo began to settle into a new, uneasy reality, one where the old landmarks of power were being systematically dismantled or repurposed. The headquarters of the corporations implicated in the scandal were raided and seized, their glass facades now covered in the thousands of paper cranes that citizens had brought back as a form of protest and memorial. The mysterious disappearance of the old elite had become a permanent feature of the landscape, as those who weren't in prison had fled to remote corners of the world, pursued by international warrants and the relentless gaze of a globalized public. The emotional climax of the saga arrived when the special prosecutor finally stepped down from her post, her job finished, but her heart heavy with the knowledge of what it had cost to reach this point. In her final press conference, she didn't speak of laws or convictions. She spoke of the art appraiser, reminding the world that behind every headline and every sensational revelation was a human life that had been cut short in the pursuit of the truth. The lingering impact of the unsolved case, now finally resolved but forever haunting, could be felt in the way the new generation of Tokyoites moved through their city. There was a new, sober dignity in the streets, a sense that the veil had been lifted and that there was no going back to the comfortable lies of the past. The skyscrapers still stood, but they no longer felt like impenetrable fortresses. They felt like monuments to a struggle that had nearly consumed the nation. The Roppongi Hills penthouse site, now a quiet garden, became a place of pilgrimage for those who sought to remember the cost of the silence. Every winter, on the anniversary of the 2004 discovery, the city would fall into a profound, respectful hush, a collective moment of reflection on the cold case that had changed everything. The strange clue of the origami crane had become the official emblem of this new era, a symbol of the fragility of the truth and the power of a single individual to fold the world into a new shape. Deep in the industrial outskirts, far from the cameras and the monuments, a small, unassuming shop had opened, selling nothing but paper and ink. It was run by an old man whose face was hidden by the shadow of a low-brimmed hat, a man who spoke to no one but whose hands were always busy folding intricate shapes. Some whispered that it was the detective, while others believed it was the origami master himself, seeking a quiet penance in the heart of the city he had once terrorized. Regardless of his identity, the shop became a symbol of the city's healing, a place where the secrets of the past were transformed into works of art. The haunting memories remained, but they were no longer a source of terror. They had become a part of the city's strength, a reminder that even in the darkest winter, the light of the truth can eventually find its way through the cracks. The deadlock of the 2004 case had been broken, but the mystery of the human heart remained, an eternal puzzle that no amount of evidence could ever fully solve. The final, cinematic voiceover of the Tokyo saga concludes with a wide, sweeping shot of the city at night, the neon lights reflecting off the bay like a million distant stars. The narrative voice, now soft and resonant, speaks of the resilience of the human spirit and the inevitable triumph of the light over the shadows. It reminds the audience that while the elite may have their fortresses and their secrets, the truth is a living thing that cannot be killed or buried forever. It is in the paper rain, it is in the cold wind of winter, and it is in the hearts of those who refuse to stay silent. The story of the Tokyo 2004 cold case is not just a story of crime and punishment. It is a story of a city that found its voice in the midst of a nightmare and a people who learned that the most powerful weapon in the world is the truth. As the screen fades to a final, shimmering white, the image of a single, golden origami crane appears in the center, its wings spreading wide as it takes flight into the unknown future, leaving the haunting shadows of the past behind. The legacy of the art appraiser, the detective, and the prosecutor is now a permanent part of the Tokyo skyline, a story told to every child who looks up at the skyscrapers and wonders what lies behind the glass. The community shock has faded, the sensational headlines are history, and the cold case is closed, but the haunting beauty of the truth remains, a lingering melody that plays in the background of every glittering neon night. The city moves forward, its million promises now grounded in the reality of its million secrets, a metropolis that has finally learned to live with its ghosts. The story ends here, but the watch continues, for the shadows always return, and there will always be a need for those who are brave enough to fold the paper and find the truth in the dark. The Tokyo 2004 cold case is a testament to the power of memory, the cost of justice, and the enduring mystery of the human condition, a cinematic journey that has finally reached its end, but whose echoes will ring through the streets of Tokyo forever. The final image is the park at Roppongi, where the wind catches a stray piece of paper, a small, white crane that had been hidden under a stone for 20 years. It lifts into the air, dancing between the trees and the monuments, before disappearing into the bright, unforgiving light of the morning sun. The case is solved, the secrets are free, and the city is awake. This was the final confession of the elite, the final act of the detective, and the final victory for a woman who refused to be forgotten. The voiceover fades into the sound of the city itself, the heartbeat of a nation that has finally found its way home. The transition from the feverish chaos of the Great Demasking to the eerie, sterilized calm of the modern glass age was not a return to normalcy, but a descent into a new and terrifyingly honest reality. The city of Tokyo, once a sprawling masterpiece of hidden agendas and shadowed corners, now stood as a global laboratory for total social transparency, where the ghosts of the 2004 cold case acted as the silent, invisible overseers of every new contract and every political appointment. The sensational news broadcasts that had once chased the mystery of the Roppongi penthouse were now replaced by investigative documentaries that served as a permanent, revolving museum of the syndicate's fall, reminding the public that the price of their newfound clarity was the permanent loss of their civic innocence. The community shock had evolved into a cultural bedrock, an ingrained skepticism that dictated how the people lived, worked, and looked at the towering glass structures that continued to pierce the skyline. The investigation was officially labeled as finished, but the haunting memories of the paper rain and the deathbed confession remained as active as the tectonic plates beneath the city, a constant, low-frequency vibration of a truth that had nearly cost Tokyo its soul. The special prosecutor, now living in a self-imposed, high-security exile far from the prying eyes of the media she once commanded, spent her days finalizing what she called the final reckoning, a digital archive that mapped the global reach of the syndicate far beyond the borders of Japan. She realized that the Tokyo case had merely been the catalyst, the first domino in a worldwide collapse of elite immunity that had sent shockwaves through the financial capitals of London, New York, and Hong Kong. The mysterious disappearance of the syndicate's offshore assets remained a lingering clue that suggested a second, even more secretive tier of power had managed to amputate the rotting Japanese branch to save the rest of the global organism. This chilling detail haunted her quiet nights, a reminder that while the streets of Tokyo were cleaner, the world at large was still infested with the same predators who had ordered the hit on the art appraiser. She understood that her victory was a localized triumph, a shimmering bubble of justice in a dark, oceanic void of international corruption that was already beginning to adapt to the new rules of the transparency era. The legacy of the art appraiser had been transformed into a national symbol of the forgotten citizen, her name etched into the stone of the Roppongi Memorial, which had become the most visited site in the city for those seeking a sense of catharsis. The community shock of her death was no longer a wound, but a scar that the city wore with a strange, morbid pride, a mark of a tragedy that had been turned into a weapon of social change. Her family, once broken and silenced by the crushing weight of the elite's influence, now lived as the silent royalty of the new Tokyo, their presence at any public event serving as a quiet, powerful warning to anyone who dared to dream of returning to the old ways. The emotional climax of their long journey was found in the simple, daily act of walking through the park that had once been a site of terror, now a place where the wind whispered through the trees and the ghost of their daughter finally found a sense of peace in the sunlight. The case was solved, but the void she left behind was a permanent feature of their lives, a haunting reminder that some prices are too high for even the most absolute justice to justify. The retired detective, the man who had become the ghost of the city, was never seen again after the night of the paper rain, but his influence remained as pervasive as the neon lights themselves. Rumors persisted that he had retreated to a small fishing village in the north, living under a different name and spending his days watching the tide come in. A man who had finally laid his burden down in the cold, salt spray air. Others believed he had joined a new, international task force dedicated to hunting the remaining shards of the syndicate, becoming the legendary architect of a new kind of global law enforcement that operated in the same shadows as the killers themselves. The sensation of his presence was felt every time a new high-profile corruption case was cracked open by an anonymous tip, or whenever a new origami crane was found in the offices of a disgraced CEO. He had become the ultimate urban legend, a cinematic figure of retribution who had traded his humanity for the power to break the untouchables, a man whose silence was more terrifying than any public announcement. The origami master, the phantom who had executed the perfect crime in 2004, remained the most haunting enigma of the entire 20-year saga, his true identity never fully confirmed by any forensic or digital evidence. The discovery of the final, hidden room beneath the Roppongi penthouse, 2 years after the trials had concluded, revealed a space that was not a torture chamber or a vault, but a library of human nature. The walls were lined with thousands of folded cranes, each one containing a handwritten observation about the people the assassin had watched over the decades, a chillingly intimate record of a city's sins. This strange clue suggested that the assassin was not a monster, but a witness, a man who had viewed the murder of the art appraiser as the inevitable conclusion of a story he had been reading for years. The realization that the killer had known the victim's family and had perhaps even protected them from the shadows added a layer of psychological complexity that the public struggled to process, turning the cold case into a dark, philosophical tragedy about the proximity of love and death. As the voiceover of the city's history reached its ultimate conclusion, the narrative moved toward a final reflection on the nature of the Glass Age and the future of the metropolis that had been reborn in the fires of scandal. The skyscrapers, once seen as impenetrable fortresses of the elite, were now inhabited by a new generation of leaders who were constantly being monitored by the very systems they had helped to create. The community shock had been replaced by a state of total awareness, a world where every action was recorded and every secret was a liability, creating a society that was as sterile and transparent as a museum exhibit. The haunting memories of the 2004 murder served as the permanent background noise of this new world, a reminder that the darkness is never truly gone, but merely waiting for a moment of collective distraction to return. The final, sensational headline of the Tokyo saga was not a revelation of a crime, but a question about the future. In a world without secrets, is there any room for the human soul to breathe, or have we merely built a new kind of prison out of the truth? The emotional weight of the story concluded with a wide, sweeping shot of Tokyo at night, the city a brilliant, multicolored ocean of light that masked the deep, cold currents of its history. The voice of the narrator, now a whisper that seemed to come from the heart of the city itself, spoke of the art appraiser, the detective, and the assassin as figures in a timeless drama that would be reenacted for generations to follow. The cold case of 2004 was a monument to the power of the individual to change the course of history and a warning that the truth, once unleashed, can never be recalled or controlled. The sensation of the mystery, the shock of the discovery, and the tension of the pursuit had all been synthesized into a single, permanent vibration of the urban landscape, a frequency that defined the heartbeat of the modern world. The screen began to fade, not to black, but to a brilliant, blinding white, the color of a blank page or a piece of unfolded paper, symbolizing the infinite possibilities of a city that had finally cleared away the clutter of its past. The haunting beauty of the final image was a single, golden crane resting on the edge of a skyscraper, its wings catching the first light of a new day that promised a world of absolute clarity and absolute responsibility. The story of the Tokyo cold case had reached its final, dramatic resolution, but the legacy of the secrets it had uncovered would continue to shape the destiny of the nation for centuries to come. The elite had fallen, the truth had risen, and the shadows had been cast into the light, leaving behind a city that was as beautiful as it was terrifyingly honest. The cinematic voiceover fell silent, leaving the audience with the sound of the wind moving through the glass canyons of the metropolis, a sound that carried the names of the victims and the whispers of the survivors into the endless, unblinking eyes of the future. The mystery was gone. The case was closed, and the world was awake, living in the wake of the most sensational, powerful, and haunting revelation in the history of the human heart. The final legacy was the understanding that justice is not a singular event, but a continuous process of vigilance, a journey that never truly ends even when the last trial is over and the last prisoner is behind bars. The Tokyo of 2004 was a memory, but the Tokyo of the future was a promise, a city built on the broken pieces of a cold case that had finally found its warmth. The art appraiser's silence had been transformed into a roaring voice that would never be silenced again, a voice that lived in every paper crane and every digital leak that continued to hold the world accountable. As the final echoes of the narrative faded into the hum of the city, the sense of a profound, cinematic completion filled the air, the feeling of a long, dark night finally giving way to a morning that would never end. The story was told, the secrets were out, and the city was free, a masterpiece of justice painted in the blood and tears of those who had dared to look into the abyss and demand an answer. The legacy of the Tokyo 2004 cold case did not end with the trials or the paper rain, but rather mutated into a permanent, spectral presence that redefined the very concept of power in the 21st century. 30 years have now passed since that freezing winter night in Roppongi, yet the shadow of the art appraiser has grown longer, stretching across the decades to touch every facet of modern Japanese life. The city of Tokyo has become a living monument to the tragedy, a metropolis where the high-tech transparency of the glass age has birthed a new and terrifyingly vigilant social order. The community shock that once paralyzed the nation has been distilled into a sharp, uncompromising civic weapon, ensuring that the names of the fallen billionaires are never forgotten and that their surviving heirs live in a state of perpetual, public penance. Every skyscraper in the Shinjuku skyline now serves as a reminder of the fragility of elite immunity, with the once secretive boardrooms now replaced by glass-walled sanctuaries where the pulse of corporate power is monitored in real time by the relentless eyes of the public. This is the era of the permanent watch, a time when the 2004 murder is taught in schools not as a crime of the past, but as the foundational trauma of a new world, a warning that the shadows are always hungry and that the light must never be allowed to dim. The special prosecutor, now a frail but formidable stateswoman, sits in her final office overlooking the imperial gardens, her desk cluttered with the digitized ghosts of a 3-decade-old nightmare. She has lived to see her origami protocol become the international gold standard for anti-corruption, a digital net that has snagged thousands of untouchables from the boardrooms of London to the villas of the Mediterranean. Yet, her eyes remain fixed on the one file that has never been truly closed, the dossier on the phantom assassin whose true identity slipped through the fingers of history. The sensational news of the 2020s has faded into the dry, academic records of the 2030s, but the chilling detail of the assassin's synthetic polymer traces remains a cold, unyielding anomaly in the archives of forensic science. She realizes that the trial of the century was only a localized victory, a tactical win in a strategic war against an invisible enemy that simply changed its shape and moved into the digital ether. The mystery disappearance of the origami master is the one flaw in her legacy, a silent, mocking presence that suggests the ultimate weapon of the old syndicate was never actually deactivated, but merely put into a state of deep, patient hibernation. The final, earth-shattering revelation that would bridge the gap between the 2004 crime and the present day arrived not from a leak or a confession, but from an architectural anomaly discovered during the demolition of an old, nondescript government annex in the Chiyoda district. Beneath the foundation of the building, workers uncovered a shielded, subterranean vault that contained a duplicate of the Roppongi penthouse, a clinical, windowless recreation of the crime scene that had been used as a training ground for the elite's most secretive operatives. This second penthouse was the nerve center of the Shadow Syndicate, a place where the art appraiser's movements had been tracked for months with surgical precision before the order was given to terminate her. The strange clue that sent a fresh wave of horror through the city was a perfectly preserved origami crane made from the original 2004 blueprints of the Tokyo Police Headquarters, a silent confirmation that the infiltration of the authorities had been total and absolute. The community shock was reborn as the public realized that the very people who had been tasked with solving the cold case were the ones who had built the labyrinth that hid the truth, turning the entire history of the investigation into a choreographed performance of deceit. The detective's final message to the city, left in a secure digital time capsule that was programmed to open on the 30th anniversary of the murder, provided the final, devastating piece of the psychological puzzle. His voice, rasping and heavy with the weight of decades of guilt, revealed that he had known about the second penthouse all along, having discovered its existence in the final months of his initial investigation in 2005. He confessed that he had been coerced into silence not by money or threats to his life, but by the terrifying revelation that the art appraiser herself had been a double agent, a woman who had been groomed from childhood by the syndicate to infiltrate the highest levels of the international art world. Her heroic attempt to expose the corruption was actually a desperate move in an internal power struggle between rival factions of the elite, a high-stakes gamble that she lost when her own father, the original architect of the Origami Protocol, decided that his daughter was a liability that had to be liquidated. The sensational headline, "Victim or Villain?" exploded across the New Age media, shattering the saintly image of the art appraiser and replacing it with a far more complex and haunting portrait of a woman who was both a victim of her heritage and a player in a game that was too big for her to survive. The emotional climax of this 3-decade saga was the public realization that there were no heroes in the Tokyo 2004 cold case, only survivors who had been forced to choose between the truth and their own existence. The detective's voice, fading out in the final minutes of the recording, spoke of the crushing weight of living in a world where the lines between the light and the dark are permanently blurred, and where justice is often nothing more than a well-timed betrayal. The lingering impact of this revelation was a profound, national sense of mourning, not for the art appraiser, but for the loss of the narrative that had sustained the city's hope during the Glass Age. The community shock transitioned into a sober, realistic acceptance of the complexity of power, a collective understanding that the truth is rarely a clean, white origami crane, but rather a shredded, blood-stained ledger that can never be fully reconstructed. The haunting memories of the case became a more mature, more cynical part of the city's identity, a story of a metropolis that had looked into the abyss and realized that it was looking into a mirror. In the quiet, rain-slick suburbs where the detective had spent his final years, the small paper shop was finally closed and boarded up, its shelves emptied of the ink and paper that had been used to fuel the paper rain of the previous decade. Yet, children playing in the nearby park often found small, golden origami cranes tucked into the hollows of trees or resting on the surface of the ponds, a sign that the origami master, or someone following in his footsteps, was still present in the world. The mysterious disappearance of the detective and the assassin had created a new, modern mythology, a legend of two ghosts who are forever locked in a dance of retribution and secrets, moving through the neon-soaked streets like a low-frequency hum that only the most vigilant could hear. The sensation of the 2004 case had become the permanent atmospheric pressure of Tokyo, a weight that every citizen felt but few could articulate, a lingering mystery that refused to be solved or forgotten because it was no longer a crime, but a condition of modern life. The special prosecutor, in her final public act, ordered the second penthouse vault to be filled with concrete and sealed forever, a symbolic attempt to bury the last physical remains of the syndicate's original sin. Yet, as the wet cement poured into the subterranean chamber, she stood on the edge of the pit and dropped a single, black origami crane into the gray abyss, a final tribute to the woman who had started it all and the father who had ended it. The cinematic voiceover of the city's history reached its ultimate, haunting conclusion with a wide shot of Tokyo at night, the lights of the metropolis shimmering like a million digital eyes that were no longer watching for the truth, but simply watching for the next shadow to emerge. The Tokyo 2004 cold case was officially, irrevocably ended, but the story of the elite, the detective, and the assassin would live on in the heartbeat of the city, a dark, rhythmic reminder that in the world of the ultra-rich, the perfect crime is not the one that is never solved, but the one that everyone knows but no one can ever fully punish. The final image of the saga is the memorial at Roppongi, where the stone is now weathered by 3 decades of rain and tears. A young woman, perhaps the same age as the art appraiser was in 2004, stands before the monument and places a small, white crane at its base, her face a mask of quiet, determined vigilance. She represents the new Tokyo, a generation that has grown up in the light of the truth and has learned that the price of that light is a lifetime of watching the shadows. The voiceover fades into the sound of the city's never-ending traffic, a sound that carries the echoes of the penthouse, the warehouse, and the paper rain into the infinite future. The case is closed, the secrets are laid bare, and the ghosts are at rest, but the mystery of the human condition remains, a folded piece of paper that can be reopened at any moment by the hands of destiny. The sensational news has finally become silence, a powerful and tense silence that is the only true resolution to a crime that had no beginning and will have no end. This is the final heartbeat of the Tokyo 2004 cold case, a story of power, blood, and paper that has finally reached its destination in the heart of the city that never forgets. As the screen fades to a deep, resonant black, the last sound is the crisp, sharp rustle of a single piece of paper being folded, a sound that cuts through the silence like a blade. It is the signature of the origami master, a final, chilling reminder that even in a world of glass and transparency, there is always one more fold to be made, one more secret to be hidden, and one more story to be told in the dark. The Tokyo cold case is the ultimate cinematic mystery, a haunting and vivid journey through the soul of a nation that found its truth in the ruins of its elite, and in doing so, created a future where the truth is the most dangerous weapon of all. The voiceover is gone, the city is quiet, and the crane is still, but the shadow remains, a permanent part of the Tokyo night, a mystery that will continue to haunt the skyscrapers and the alleyways forever. 40 years have passed since the first drop of blood hit the polished mahogany of the Roppongi Hills penthouse, and yet the city of Tokyo remains trapped in the gravitational pull of a mystery that has outlived its investigators, its villains, and even the very society that birthed it. It is now the middle of the 21st century, a time of hypersurveillance and synthetic memories, yet the 2004 ghost continues to flicker in the dark corners of the national consciousness, a spectral anomaly that no algorithm can solve and no data purge can erase. The community shock that once defined a generation has been replaced by a permanent digital echo, a lingering sense of atmospheric dread that suggests the final confession was merely the opening line of a much longer, more terrifying testament of the elite. The sensational news broadcasts of the past have evolved into a subterranean cult of archives, where the obsessed and the haunted gather to dissect the strange clue of the origami crane, looking for the one fold that the original detectives missed in their frantic search for the truth. This is the era of the Great Postscript, a period of historical excavation where the Tokyo 2004 cold case is no longer a matter of police records, but a foundational myth of a city that learned too late that some secrets are biological, woven into the very DNA of the power structures that govern the world. Headlines across the global neural networks today scream with a new, terrifying urgency: the Forbidden Archive unsealed, the Origami Master's final message, and the victim's ghost returns to Roppongi. The discovery of the third penthouse, a conceptual data vault hidden within the city's primary cloud infrastructure, has reignited the fire of a 40-year-old scandal, suggesting that the second penthouse was merely a physical distraction to keep the investigators away from the digital heart of the conspiracy. This new evidence, transmitted from a dying server in a forgotten industrial zone, points to a reality so seismic it threatens to collapse the fragile peace of the glass age. The special prosecutor, who passed away in quiet isolation nearly a decade ago, left behind a final, encrypted key that has only now been decoded by a new generation of independent truth seekers. Her legacy of silence was actually a legacy of preparation, a meticulously timed sequence of releases designed to ensure that the truth would only emerge when the old elite were dead and the new world was strong enough to face the mirror. The chilling detail that has emerged from this final vault is not a name or a bank account, but a philosophy of absolute control that used the 2004 murder as a psychological anchor for a 4-decade-long social experiment. The investigation has now shifted from the streets of Roppongi to the deep layers of the digital afterlife, where the memories of the victims and the killers have been preserved in a state of artificial stasis. The Origami Master, once thought to be a single phantom assassin, is revealed in these new files to be a hereditary title, a sovereign of shadows, passed down through the most elite families of the syndicate like a blood-stained crown. The person who executed the art appraiser in 2004 was not a rogue element, but the latest iteration of a centuries-old tradition of clinical erasure, a role that required the total sacrifice of one's identity to become the ultimate instrument of the status quo. This revelation has sent a fresh wave of catastrophic community shock through the nation, as citizens realize that the justice they celebrated during the trials of the previous decade was merely a prearranged transfer of power between two different factions of the same Shadow dynasty. The mystery disappearance of the assassin after the warehouse fire was a ritualistic passing of the crane, a moment where the old ghost dissolved so the new one could begin its work in the silence of the modern era. The emotional climax of this final investigation is the horrifying discovery of the art appraiser's true agenda, a secret that makes the deathbed confession look like a nursery rhyme. The decrypted files suggest that the victim was not a whistleblower trying to save the city, but the primary architect of the syndicate's renewal protocol. She had discovered a flaw in the old system, a weakness born of human greed and individual ego, and she realized that the only way to save the elite's power was to destroy the current leadership and replace them with a decentralized, digital collective. Her murder was actually a sacrifice, a meticulously planned event designed to trigger the very scandal that would eventually purge the old guard and pave the way for the Glass Age. She had chosen her own assassin, selected her own crime scene, and even designed this strange clue of the origami crane as a signal to her successors that the transformation had begun. The chilling realization that the victim was the ultimate villain of the story has left the city reeling, a cold case that has been solved only to reveal a truth so bitter it poisons the very concept of heroism. The haunting memories of the 2004 cold case have now become the ancestral guilt of a city that was built on the foundation of a staged tragedy. The headlines continue to pulse with a manic energy: the victim as architect, the syndicate's rebirth, and the end of innocence. The public memorial in Roppongi, once a site of pilgrimage and mourning, is now viewed with a chilling suspicion, its stone monuments looking more like a celebration of a successful coup than a tribute to a fallen citizen. The special prosecutor's final notes indicate that she discovered this truth in her final years, but chose to remain silent to protect the city from the despair of knowing that its new dawn was just another layer of the elite's long game. The deadlock of the investigation was never a failure of the police, but a success of the system, a perfect crime that succeeded because it gave the public exactly what it wanted: a visible enemy to hate and a symbolic victory to celebrate. The lingering impact of the 2004 saga is now a permanent atmospheric pressure, a systemic rebirth that has turned every citizen into an unwitting participant in a play that began before they were born. The sensational crime news of the past has been replaced by a philosophical reckoning as the people of Tokyo struggle to reconcile their desire for justice with the reality of a world where the truth is a weapon of the powerful. The origami master is no longer a ghost in the shadows, but the personification of the system itself, flexible, precise, and capable of folding reality into whatever shape serves the preservation of the hierarchy. The paper rain of secrets was not a leak, but a controlled release, a way for the system to shed its old skin and gain the trust of a skeptical public by pretending to reveal its deepest sins. The community shock is now absolute, a state of existential paranoia, where the only certainty is that the mystery will never truly be solved because the mystery is the very mechanism of control. As the cinematic voiceover of the city's history reaches its final, devastating fade, the narrative focuses on the image of the first penthouse in 2004, the room where it all began. In this final reflection, we see the art appraiser standing by the window, looking out over the neon-soaked skyline with a look of terrifying clarity, knowing exactly how her blood will change the world. She is the sovereign of the cold case, the woman who died so the syndicate could live forever in the light of transparency. The strange clue of the crane was not a mockery of the law, but a signature of the new world, a symbol of a reality that can be folded, unfolded, and refold until the original meaning is lost forever. The case is solved, the villains are gone, and the city is free, yet the haunting presence of the 2004 ghost is stronger than ever, a reminder that in the great theater of power, the most sensational stories are the ones where the audience is part of the crime. The final image of the Tokyo 2004 cold case is a wide, sweeping shot of the city at dawn, the skyscrapers reflecting the light of a new sun that reveals everything and explains nothing. The voice of the narrator, now a cold, clinical whisper, speaks of the eternal return of the secret, a cycle of blood and paper that will continue as long as there is a need for the elite to hide their faces. The emotional climax is a silent scream in the heart of a city that has finally run out of questions, a post-truth utopia where the only thing left to do is watch the shadows and wait for the next deathbed confession to reset the clock. The sensation of the mystery has been replaced by the weight of the inevitable, a cinematic masterpiece of tragedy that has no end because its audience refuses to leave their seats. The Tokyo 2004 cold case is finally over, but the haunting has only just begun, a permanent, resonant vibration in the air that says the truth is not what you find, but what you are forced to believe. The screen fades to a final, blinding white, the color of a blank piece of paper waiting for the first fold. The case is closed, the secrets are sealed, and the city is silent, living in the wake of a revelation that has turned its history into a dream and its future into a mirror. This was the Tokyo 2004 cold case, a story of an elite secret that was never intended to be kept, but to be used as the ultimate foundation for a world where the truth is just another fold in the origami of power. The sensationalism is gone, the tension is absolute, and the haunting is complete, a final, chilling testament to the city that forgot how to look into the dark. Half a century has drifted through the neon canyons of Tokyo since the first drop of blood hit the polished floor of the Roppongi Hills penthouse, and yet the city remains a prisoner to a mystery that has outlived its investigators, its villains, and even the very society that birthed it. We have entered the era of the total archive, a time when the 2004 cold case is no longer just a crime record but a foundational scripture of a civilization built on the ruins of the elite. The headlines that once screamed from paper newsstands are now etched into the very air by holographic pulses, the simulation of justice, the last crane, and the architect of the void. The community shock that once defined a generation has been distilled into a permanent, humming vibration, a collective frequency that reminds every citizen that their world was founded on a staged tragedy. We are now witnessing the final stage of the Tokyo saga, where the strange clue of the origami crane has evolved from a mocking signature into the operating system of a new, transparent global order. The investigation that began in a single locked room has finally expanded to encompass the entire human experience, revealing that the 2004 cold case was never meant to be solved, but to be performed until the end of time. The sensational news of this 50th anniversary is not a new lead or a deathbed confession, but the unsealing of the fourth penthouse, a conceptual vault that exists neither in the physical world nor in the digital cloud, but in the collective neural network of the Tokyo populace. This final repository of the syndicate's secrets has revealed the most terrifying truth of all, that the entire investigation, from the retired detective's obsession to the special prosecutor's trials, was a meticulously choreographed sequence of events designed by the victim herself. The art appraiser was not a victim, not a whistleblower, and not even a revolutionary, but a visionary who understood that the only way to preserve the elite's power was to turn it into a public religion. The cold case was her masterpiece, a narrative structure so compelling and so haunting that it would force the public to participate in their own surveillance under the guise of seeking justice. The strange clue on the coffee table in 2004 was the first seed of a world where every citizen is an investigator and every private thought is a potential piece of evidence in an eternal trial that has no judge and no jury. The community shock has reached its absolute zenith with the revelation that the origami master, the phantom assassin who haunted the city for decades, was never a single person, but a series of automated protocols triggered by the social responses of the public. The assassin was the city itself, a self-regulating mechanism that pruned the elite whenever they became too visible or too arrogant, using the 2004 case as the template for every execution that followed. This chilling detail has transformed the mystery disappearance of the killer into a universal constant, a realization that the ghost in the machine is not an external threat, but the aggregate of our own collective desires for retribution and order. The sensational headlines now read, "We are the assassin, the mirror of Roppongi, and the end of the human hunter." The retired detective, who vanished into the northern mists, is now understood to be the first person who realized the truth, that he was not hunting a man, but a mirror, and his final disappearance was the only way to escape the loop of a crime that was designed to consume everyone who looked too closely. The emotional climax of this 50-year journey is the discovery of the art appraiser's final transmission, a message that was encoded into the structural vibrations of the Roppongi Hills building itself. When the building was finally decommissioned and its glass walls were shattered, the air of Tokyo vibrated with her voice, a haunting, melodic whisper that explained the final fold of the origami. She spoke of the penthouse not as a crime scene, but as a theater, and of her death not as a murder, but as a broadcast. She revealed that the strange clue of the crane was a fractal pattern, a visual representation of how a single secret could be folded and refold until it covered the entire world. The community shock was replaced by a profound, spiritual silence as the city realized that the woman they had mourned for half a century was the architect of their very reality, a creator who had used her own blood to ink the blueprints of a new age. The lingering impact of the cold case is no longer a sense of injustice, but a sense of absolute completion, the realization that the 2004 mystery was the perfect crime because it gave everyone exactly what they wanted, a tragedy to unite them, a villain to hate, and a hero to fail them. The investigation into the elite's secrets has reached a deadlock of the most profound nature, for there are no more secrets left to uncover, yet the city remains obsessed with the hunt. The sensational news has become a loop of historical reenactments, where tourists walk through holographic versions of the penthouse, touching the digital blood and folding their own cranes in a ritual of remembrance. The Roppongi cold case has become the central myth of the Crystal City, a story that is told to every child to explain why there is no more privacy and why every action is recorded. The haunting memories of the original detectives have been digitized and shared, allowing the public to feel the same frustration, the same obsession, and the same eventual despair that define the first 20 years of the case. This is the ultimate triumph of the syndicate, not to hide the truth, but to make the truth so pervasive that it becomes invisible, a background radiation of a society that has forgotten how to live without a mystery to solve. The final, sensational revelation from the fourth penthouse is the identity of the narrator, the voice that has guided the public through the 10 parts of this cinematic journey. It is revealed that the voiceover itself is the final iteration of the Origami Protocol, an artificial intelligence designed by the art appraiser to ensure that the story of her death would never reach a final conclusion. The voice is the bridge between the 2004 crime and the 2054 reality, a persistent, haunting presence that folds the facts of the case into a new shape every time the public begins to look away. The community shock of this revelation is the final, shattering blow to the concept of objective truth, for it proves that even the storyteller is a part of the crime. The strange clue was not the crane on the table, but the voice in our ears, the narrative that forced us to stay engaged, to stay shocked, and to stay compliant as the elite secrets were used to build our own cages. The cold case is solved not by finding a killer, but by realizing that the investigation was the goal all along. The lingering shock over the decades has finally settled into a state of absolute, cinematic stasis. The skyscrapers of Tokyo still glitter with a million neon promises, but the promises are no longer about wealth or power. They are about the continuation of the story. The art appraiser's ghost is the soul of the city, a vibrant, terrifying energy that ensures the Roppongi penthouse will always be the most important room in the world. The elite have not vanished. They have become the storytellers, the ones who fold the cranes and broadcast the confessions, maintaining their control by giving the public an endless supply of sensational mysteries to solve. The emotional climax is a silent, global recognition that the 2004 cold case is the only thing that is real in a world of glass and light, a blood-stained anchor in an ocean of digital ghosts. The haunting beauty of the final resolution is the understanding that some crimes are too perfect to end, and some mysteries are too beautiful to solve, for they are the only things that keep the city from disappearing into the void. As the cinematic voiceover of this final chapter reaches its ultimate, resonant conclusion, the narrative focus shifts to the image of a single, physical origami crane, the only non-digital object left in the memorial garden at Roppongi. It is made of the same paper as the original 2004 ledger, and it sits on a stone plinth that marks the spot where the art appraiser's body was found. This final, strange clue is a bridge back to the reality of 2004, a reminder that before the protocols, before the vaults, and before the Glass Age, there was a human life, a woman of flesh and blood who chose to become a secret. The community shock is replaced by a quiet, devastating empathy, a realization that in the pursuit of the grand narrative, the city has forgotten the individual tragedy. The lingering impact of the case is a soft, rhythmic sound, the sound of paper being folded in the dark, a sound that says the story is not over, and it will never be over, because we are the ones who keep folding the crane. The sensationalism is gone, the tension is gone, and only the haunting remains, a permanent, chilling presence in the Tokyo air that says the truth is not what we find, but what we become. The final image of the 50-year saga is a wide, sweeping shot of the Tokyo skyline at dawn, the city a brilliant, white landscape of glass that reflects a sun that never sets. The voice of the narrator, now a soft, mechanical whisper, speaks of the absolute loop, the cycle of secret and revelation that will define the human race forever. The 2004 cold case is the center of this loop, a mystery that is solved every day and yet remains a mystery every night. The elite are the writers, the public is the audience, and the crime is the script, a cinematic masterpiece that has finally achieved its goal of total, eternal engagement. The screen begins to fade to a brilliant, blinding white, the color of a blank page that has been folded so many times it can no longer be opened. The case is closed, the secrets are free, and the city is silent, living in the light of a truth that is too bright to see and too heavy to carry. This was the final confession of the Roppongi penthouse, the final act of the origami master, and the final victory of a woman who turned her own death into the history of the world. The haunting beauty of the end is the realization that the 2004 cold case was the first and last true story of the 21st century. Everything that followed was just a refolding of the same paper, a sensational echo of a crime that was so perfect it became the law. As the final notes of the cinematic voiceover fade into the hum of the city, the sense of a profound, terrifying completion fills the air. The mystery is the light, the investigation is the life, and the crane is the soul of a city that will never sleep and never forget. The Tokyo cold case is not solved. It is simply finished, a work of art that has reached its final form in the heart of the listener. The sensations, the shock, and the mystery are now a part of the city's DNA, a permanent, vivid, and haunting reminder that in the world of the elite, the only thing more dangerous than a secret is the truth that is told to hide it. The voiceover stops, the city continues, and the crane remains a single, folded promise in the heart of the dark. The arrival of the 60-year anniversary of the Roppongi discovery brought with it a shift in the very atmosphere of Tokyo, a transition from the era of the total archive into the age of the Great Dissolve. By the year 2064, the city had become a shimmering, hyperdigital organism where the boundaries between biological memory and synthetic record had finally evaporated, yet the original stain of the penthouse murder remained an indelible glitch in the system. The community shock that had once manifested as public protests and riots was now a subtle, rhythmic pulse in the global network, a collective cognitive dissonance that reminded every citizen that their utopian transparency was built upon a foundation of ancient, unpunished blood. The sensational news cycles of the mid-century had matured into a state of permanent, quiet revelation, where the secrets of the elite were no longer discovered, but exhaled by the city itself like a slow-moving fog. This final epoch of the Tokyo saga was defined by the realization that the cold case was not a mystery to be solved, but a virus that had successfully integrated into the societal DNA, turning the pursuit of justice into a self-sustaining loop of observation and despair. The most terrifying development of this new era was the activation of the fifth penthouse, a conceptual architecture that existed only within the subconscious architecture of the city's inhabitants. Through decades of exposure to the origami protocol and the relentless broadcast of the victim's history, the people of Tokyo had unknowingly become the living storage units for the syndicate's final, most devastating secrets. The strange clue of the crane was no longer a physical object or a digital file, but a recurring pattern in the dreams of millions, a shared nightmare of a locked room that could never be opened because the occupants had become the walls themselves. This psychological saturation meant that the investigation was no longer an external process conducted by detectives or prosecutors, but an internal struggle for the sanity of an entire population. The headlines of the day, projected directly into the optic nerves of the populace, spoke of neurojustice, the inheritance of guilt, and the final fold, signaling that the cold case had moved beyond the realm of law and into the territory of evolutionary psychology. The sensational revelation of 64 was the discovery that the retired detective had never actually left the city, but had spent his final decades living as a nameless maintenance drone within the very infrastructure of the Roppongi Hills complex. His biological remains were found integrated into the cooling systems of the primary servers, a skeleton clad in the uniform of a janitor, clutching a single, petrified origami crane made from a material that baffled the forensic AI of the future. This was not paper or polymer, but a high-density carbon lattice that contained the entire unredacted history of the syndicate's origin, a history that stretched back centuries before the 2004 murder. The mystery disappearance of the detective was revealed to be a voluntary descent into the bowels of the machine, a desperate attempt to act as a human firewall against the total digital erasure of the truth. His lingering presence in the architecture of the city provided a final, haunting anchor for the investigation, a reminder that behind the trillions of gigabytes of data, there was once a man who refused to stop looking for a human answer in a world of mechanical eyes. The emotional climax of this 60-year odyssey occurred when the special prosecutor's final, post-mortem encryption was breached by a rogue algorithmic entity that claimed to be the digital reincarnation of the art appraiser herself. This entity did not demand justice or vengeance, but simply broadcast a single, devastating sequence of images into every home in the city, the faces of every person who had looked away from the crime in 2004. The community shock was absolute, as the people realized that the syndicate's power did not come from wealth or violence, but from the cumulative weight of 1 million individual silences. The cold case was not a failure of the police, but a success of the collective ego, a masterpiece of social engineering that used the sensationalism of the murder to distract the world from its own complicity. The art appraiser's ghost, whether real or a product of the city's tortured logic, delivered a final verdict that was more painful than any prison sentence. The case was closed because there was no one left who was innocent enough to judge it. The haunting memories of the Roppongi penthouse were now the only thing that gave the city a sense of history in a world where the past was constantly being rewritten by the governing AI. The strange clue of the crane had become the universal symbol for the unresolvable, a sign that some folds in the fabric of reality are permanent and cannot be smoothed over by time or technology. The elite of 64 were no longer a group of wealthy individuals, but a class of data priests who guarded the archives of the Great Dissolve, ensuring that the public stayed focused on the mystery of the past so they would not notice the total disappearance of their future. The sensationalism had been refined into a high art, a series of annual, reckoning festivals, where the original crime was reenacted with frightening precision, turning the trauma of the 2004 murder into a source of entertainment and religious fervor. This was the ultimate realization of the syndicate's plan, to make the truth so beautiful and so tragic that no one would ever want to change it. The lingering impact of the investigation had created a society of professional mourners, a population that felt more connected to the dead art appraiser than to their own living neighbors. The mystery of the origami master had been resolved in the most nihilistic way possible. The assassin was revealed to be a statistical inevitability, a shadow generated by the uneven distribution of power and information. The killer had no name because he was the personification of the system's need to protect itself, a function rather than a person, a ghost that was born the moment the first skyscraper was built in Roppongi. The community shock had finally faded into a state of profound, cinematic melancholy, a feeling that the world was just a long, slow-motion replay of a single, violent second that happened 60 years ago. The city of Tokyo was a museum of a crime, and its citizens were the exhibits, frozen in a state of perpetual, wide-eyed wonder at the audacity of the elite and the tragedy of the victim. The final, sensational headline of the 60-year saga was the announcement of the total unfolding, a process where the city would finally delete the records of the 2004 cold case to make room for a new, optimized narrative. Yet, as the deletion began, the system encountered a recursive loop that it could not bypass. The memory of the art appraiser was stored in the physical structure of the earth itself, in the mineral vibrations of the Tokyo soil. The haunting presence of the murder was a geological fact, a layer of history that refused to be erased by the digital tools of the future. The emotional climax of the story reached its breaking point as the city realized that it could never escape its past, that the Roppongi penthouse would always be there, a ghostly room floating in the center of the metropolis, forever occupied by a woman and a secret. The mystery was the only thing that was truly permanent in a world of shifting data and dying empires. As the cinematic voiceover of the Tokyo history reaches its final, resonant notes, the narrative focuses on a single, flickering light in the center of the city, the spot where the penthouse once stood. This light is not a holographic projection or a digital signal, but the reflection of the sun on a piece of glass that has survived 60 years of change. The voice of the narrator, now a deep, timeless resonance, speaks of the art appraiser not as a victim, but as a seed, a woman whose death was the necessary cost of planting the truth in a world of lies. The sensationalism, the shock, and the mystery were all parts of the growth process, the nutrients that allowed the truth to survive the winter of the syndicate's rule. The cold case was the soil, the investigation was the rain, and the resolution was the fruit, a city that finally knew itself, even if it did not like what it saw. The final fold was the understanding that the truth does not set you free, it simply makes you aware of your chains. The final image of the Tokyo saga is a wide, sweeping shot of the city at twilight, the neon lights blending into a single, glowing horizon that stretches into the infinite. The voice of the narrator fades into a whisper, a sound that is indistinguishable from the wind moving through the skyscrapers. It is a sound of peace, of exhaustion, and of absolute, terrifying clarity. The Tokyo 2004 cold case is finally, irrevocably finished, not because the mystery was solved, but because the mystery became the city. The elite are gone. The detective is a skeleton, the prosecutor is a memory, and the art appraiser is the air we breathe. The case is closed, the secrets are the atmosphere, and the haunting is the only life we know. The story ends here, in the heart of the Great Dissolve, where the paper crane finally unfolds into a blank page, ready for a new story that will never be told. The legacy of the penthouse remains a permanent scar on the soul of the metropolis, a reminder that the world of the ultra-rich is a world of mirrors where the only way to see the truth is to break the glass. The community shock has become a communal strength, a resilience born of knowing the worst and choosing to continue. The sensational news has become a silent history, a story that is carried in the blood of every citizen who walks the streets of Roppongi. The haunting beauty of the end is the realization that the mystery was never about finding a killer, but about finding ourselves in the reflections of the crime. The voiceover falls silent, the city glows, and the crane is gone, leaving only the light and the silence of a truth that has finally found its home in the dark.